welcome to the second VBIAF Sectoral Guide Townhall. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us so early. Well, quite early. We're glad to have you with us. Today, we're going to share with you comprehensive guidance documents on the country's key sectors, oil and gas, manufacturing, as well as the construction and infrastructure industry. They will be presented to you by industry practitioners and subject matter experts. And we do welcome feedback from everyone who's joining, whether you are an academician or industry observer or whoever you are. Please feel free to drop all your questions and feedback in the comments box. We will take them all into consideration. And if time permits, I will take some of your questions, relevant questions, and post them to our speakers today. We're going to have 3 presentations on 3 main sectors that I've mentioned just now. We have a full day ahead of us. So please feel free to give your feedback, because this is a two-way communication. We do want to share, we do want to get inputs from you in terms of the presentation papers. Thanks so much. So without further ado, let me introduce to you for his opening remarks. Please welcome Encik Syamsul Azwan Ahmad Fauzi, the Chief Executive Officer of Public Islamic Bank Berhad and the Chairman of the Sectoral Guide Working Group.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. My esteemed colleague from the Islamic Banking Fraternity, Honorable Representative from Bank Negara Malaysia, Puan Madalina, Dr. Hamim, and Encik Nifaris and team. Our essential technical partners, representative from World Bank, World Wildlife Fund, Petronas, Sirim, Malaysian Green Tech Technology Corporation, Hibiscus Petroleum, Malaysian Gas Association, Malaysian Petroleum Resources Corporation, Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, Construction Industry Development Board, my friends, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone for joining us in this information sharing session for the second cohort of the VBIAF Sectoral Guide Town Hall. Every day, we are awakened to events that has direct and indirect impact on the state and well-being of our world. Events that has negative repercussion to our environment. These include major man-made catastrophes, such as the Exxon Valdez oil spill incident that dumped 11 million gallons of crude oil across 1,000 miles of Alaskan shoreline. The 2019-2020 Australian bushfire season, known as the Black Summer, where the estimated losses were over 100 billion Australian dollars. 46 million acres of land were burned, 3,500 homes were destroyed, and 34 deaths directly linked to these fires. And the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a collection of plastic and waste in the Pacific Ocean, covering an estimated area size of 1.6 million square kilometers. This event has caused loss of life, damage to properties, and deterioration in quality of life to many. However, mankind is not a blameless victim in all of these occurrences. Decades and centuries of exploitation of nature's offering has led to most of these issues that we face today. Deforestation, excessive mining, destruction of wildlife habitat has changed the face of Earth. It has led to massive extinction of living species and global warming, which in turn impact mankind. With this realization, it is our responsibility, our mandate as leaders of this generation, to take important action to stop and minimize the damage that is being done. We have to be the woken generation. In one of his hadiths, the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned about the responsibilities and mankind's role in this world, as recorded by Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anh. The Prophet said, "No doubt, every one of you is a shepherd and is responsible for his flock." Learning from this, each and every one of us are the appointed Caliph of this world, and it is up to us to start managing it better. In this regard, the banking fraternity, being member of the global community, has to do our parts in ensuring the good change happen. We can see much changes are taking shape to improve how banking is run. Bank needs to look at how it can influence its business partners and customers and society at large to be sensitive on the long-term impact of our action. In Malaysia, with the introduction of value-based intimidation initiative in 2017, led by Bank Negara Malaysia, Islamic banks are now incorporating not only business consideration, but also incorporating VBI values in their assessment, generating positive and sustainable impact to the economy, community, and environment in running its business in line with Sharia principle. BNM has also collaborated with the Joint Committee on Climate Change, JC3, to issue the Climate Change and Principle-Based Taxonomy Guidance document in April 2021 to facilitate financial institutions in accessing and classifying economic activities that contribute to climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. In addition, the Islamic banks, through its VBI community of practitioners, COP members, which now consists of 15 Islamic banks, has formed the Value-Based Intimidation Sectoral Guide Working Group. This working group, which also includes team members from Bank Negara, World Bank, WWF, and industry experts, were tasked to develop the VBIAF Sectoral Guide, which would serve as an in-depth impact-based risk management toolkit to guide financial institutions in implementing VBIAF in selected sectors at a more granular and transactional level. The first cohort of the VBIAF working group, which was formed in 2019 to oversee the development of the inaugural sectoral guide, which focuses on 3 sectors, namely palm oil, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. The working group successfully issued the sectoral guide for the mentioned sectors on March 31st, 2021. To continue with the success of the first cohort, I was given the honor by my peers to lead the formation of the second cohort of the Sectoral Guide Working Group to develop VBIAF guides for the following 3 sectors: oil and gas, manufacturing, and construction and infrastructure. This sectoral guide that has been developed will not only be useful to financial institutions in terms of VBI integration, but will also serve to raise awareness on the scope of ESG, sustainability financing, and responsible banking. I am hoping that the sectoral guide will trigger new areas of investigation, new credit processes, new VBI mandates, offering sufficient motivation for FIs to not only implement the guidelines, but also making further improvement in their own VBI and ESG operating models and decision-making. This will ultimately lead to FIs managing their ESG risk exposure better and makes ESG performance a differentiator to strengthen their value proposition to investors and customers alike. While the broad objective of this cohort remained the same as the previous one, we had incorporated some improvement and change to better facilitate the information flow related in this edition. We appointed an independent content writer and editor across all the sub-working groups. This allows us to have a standardized approach in presenting information, presentation structure, and flow of the document. This would allow a better understanding of the guide, making it easy to make comparison on the different industries and requirement of each sector, and to allow easy adoption of new enhancement in the future. To better understand the format and structure of the guide, I would like Dr. Kisha from Impacto, our Chief Editor and Content Writer, to take us through in the next segment. This will be followed by a presentation of the sectoral guide by the project manager and a presentation on industry update by our technical expert. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation of the sectoral guide. And at the end of this town hall session, we would like to extend our warm invite to Puan Madilina from Jabatan Perbankan Islam dan Takaful from Bank Negara Malaysia to give her closing remark. I would like to end my speech by thanking everyone in advance for taking time to review the draft sectoral guide and for submitting your valuable suggestions and feedback. I hope all of us can play our part to ensure the objective of this cohort and the VBIAF sectoral guide can be met and will be an important tool to not only change how FIs conduct their assessment, but also by bringing change at every level of society as we ensure the sustainability of our environment and ecosystem for the benefit of future generations to come. I would like also to express my thanks to Encik Ikhwan Mosani for leading the last cohort and successfully launched the inaugural sectoral guides. also for his advice and pointers that made my transition into this role easier. To Puan Madalena, Dr. Hamim, Encik Faris, and the team from Bank Negara for guiding us and advice on how best to approach this. Dr. Kishore for being brilliant and providing necessary input to make these papers a detailed and comprehensive guidance paper with user-friendly features. We hope to continue to have you supporting this initiative. To the project managers, CIMB Islamic, Alliance Islamic, and Bank Rakyat for taking the lead and organizing your respective team to come up with very detailed and very useful information and developing the risk framework, which will be an important tool for the industry. Kudos to the team and all the other COP members that has given their precious time and energy to make this into a success. A million thanks to our technical partners for providing the team with all the necessary advice and wisdom. And finally, to our dazzling secretariat, IB, Puan Ratna and her team for being the best time management team, organizer and advisor to ensure we complete this exercise as per our day one plan. Thank you all. Before I end, I would like for us to also ponder a verse from a hadith as narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ said, while a man was walking, he saw a thorny branch on the road, so he removed it, and Allah appreciated his action and forgave him. Stay safe, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shamsul Azwan, for those opening remarks. Now, for the project overview of the 3 sectoral guide documents, please welcome Dr. Kishore Aburi, Content Advisory and Editorial Support of Impacto Sendirian Berhad. Dr. Kishore.
A very good morning, everyone. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our chairman for providing such a comprehensive background to our participants today, who will now, I'm sure, appreciate both our intent and the objective of creating value for the industry at large through this project. So I'm going to start with my first slide, and I'm going to take about 10 minutes to share the project overview. And I'm going to start with the process and the scope. The development of the sector guides took place over a period of 6 months with about 1,200 hours of research, deliberations, information collation, analysis, and content management. Based on the direction set by the first cohort, the first step was, of course, to develop a structured framework with feedback, inputs, and recommendations from the respective project managers, the editorial team, as well as the experts and observers. Under the direction of our 3 project managers, the working group members then undertook desktop research on industry best practices, proven processes and strategies in their own organizations, local, regional, and international ESG standards, frameworks, and market indices. The sectoral context and validation was provided by our team of technical and subject matter experts who not only sourced credible data and information, but also challenged and many times argued on the level and degree of content maturity and content depth that we needed to maintain consistently across all the 3 sector guides. The editorial team, represented by me and Impacto, then supported with context setting and integration into the predetermined and pre-approved sectoral guide framework. So in terms of the scale, if you look on the screen, there are more than 40 technical and subject matter experts and observers were involved. There were more than 50 project managers, working group, and contributing members. IBIM led the secretariat, and Impacto provided the editorial support, all to cover the 3 critical sector guides. Moving on to the next slide. I'm now going to quickly share some of the challenges we faced. The challenge at the very outset when we started the project was to plan and deliver a coherent and consistent document across all 3 sector guides. And we aimed to make it a live sectoral guide that could be further developed to include relevant subsectors in near future, as well as to accommodate various developments in the ESG space. In terms of the structure, the document has been kept very simple, which is easy to understand with relevant examples on subsectors or microsectors. We've included some case studies, cross-references to relevant reports and standards, and all of this make these sector guides very practical. The overall flow has been improved in terms of its structure, where we clearly drew a distinction between economic, ESG, and policy contexts, which is a good background for FIs before they dip into the guidelines. Our aspiration all along has been to introduce improvements over the previous cohort, mainly to make the document easy to understand, adopt, and implement. In the process, the challenge was to ensure the document meets all professional standards and maintains quality as well as applicability of information, which was well established by the first cohort. The applicability of the document in particular was made very clear, where we were communicating the need to read the guidelines in conjunction with other critical documents such as the VBIAF, Bank Nigara's climate change and principle-based taxonomy, various frameworks adopted by the FIs, etc. We've also highlighted the need to periodically review this document to keep it relevant and useful. The next challenge has been to acknowledge the fact that all FIs may not necessarily share the same level of maturity in terms of adoption and integration of ESG principles and strategies, and ensure the content is relevant, comprehensible, and practical for all FIs, irrespective of their orientation to sustainability. So in particular, the section on impact-based risk assessments have been categorized into two levels in view of the different degree of ESG understanding and maturity of FIs in their integration of sustainability principles into the banking. Level 1 is a pure checklist approach, whereas level 2 pushes the FIs to dig a little bit deeper and undertake a qualitative assessment of ESG performance. Now, considering the fact that the current sectors are very broad, especially manufacturing and construction and infrastructure, the challenge has also been to choose between maintaining the focus on the main sector's life cycle and covering priority subsectors for each of them. So the real challenge, however, has also been to source relevant and credible data on subsectors. Last but not the least, the implementation of the guidelines will be ineffective if there is no clear expectation set on the performance evaluation, learning, and management. And I believe this is an excellent addition and definitely an improvement, where we have included components such as action plan mandates, stakeholder inclusion and validation process, etc. And that's all from me. With this background, I'm sure you'll appreciate the presentations from our project managers and technical experts today, who will briefly share the key highlights of the respective sector guides. Thank you so much.
So we will now move on to the sector's presentation. But before that, we'd like to say a quick thanks to Al-Rajhi for making possible the sector's presentation that you are about to see today. So before we move on to the actual presentations in a few minutes, allow us to show you a brief video of the sponsor of our sector's presentations today, Al-Rajhi. Enjoy.
Assalamu alaikum and hello. My name is Oz Ahmed and I am the CEO of Al-Rajhi Bank Malaysia. It's our great honour and privilege to be sponsoring today's event. VBI, or Values-Based Intermediation, started all the way back in 2017, where a small group of people from the regulator and the industry came together to ask that question: how could banking be done better? How could it be done differently? By March of 2018, VBI was launched. VBI is a way of looking at banking differently. It looks at areas of economic prosperity, but not just on its own. It takes into account the impact on people or society and the planet or environment. It has parallels with the ESG agenda and sustainability, but the lens that it looks through is a lens of Sharia. But what does VBI mean for Malaysia? VBI over the last 3 years has allowed Malaysia in the financial services sector to accelerate past other jurisdictions when it comes to this agenda of sustainability. It is an increasingly important agenda, and financial services companies have a very important role in directing capital in a different way for positive impact for today and also the future. Malaysia has been leading in other areas such as the JC3 and also a release of a climate change taxonomy. But VBI stretches across that work and into societal areas as well. Islamic banks themselves, very much in their purpose, in their nature, have that need to do more for society and the environment. And I'm very pleased that Al-Rajihi Bank Malaysia is the newest member of the community of practitioners that are out there supporting values-based intermediation. But today, what you're doing in the VBIAF Sectoral Guide Townhall is creating the second group of sectoral guides that help financial institutions in their journey towards embedding VBI and sustainability within their business practices. And learning from best practices, we can accelerate the knowledge and also the implementation of impactful banking. In its essence, what we allow Islamic banks to do is to go back to their core purpose. Yes, it is to do financial services. Yes, it is to grow economic prosperity. But at the same time, it is to have a positive impact in that broader ecosystem of society and environment. I wish you a very productive town hall today, and thank you to IBIM for bringing everybody together and making this happen.
Today, we will now move on straight to it. We'll start with the first sector, oil and gas. Now, with a very challenging industry that is going huge transition and a radical shift in business models in all sectors of its business, from upstream, midstream to downstream, and also the urge and the push to go more into renewables, what's next for the ONG industry after a very damaging pandemic? Now, I would like to welcome on Mr. Nazib Bek, Regional Head of Strategic Initiatives for Islamic Banking of CIMB Islamic Bank Berhad, to give a briefing on the guidance document on the oil and gas sector. Mr. Nazib.
Thank you, Luqman, for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank IBIM for organizing this session. Today, I'll be presenting a summary of the oil and gas sector guidance document. In order for the world to make significant steps towards meeting its climate change goals, the oil and gas industry will have to play a big part. Its operations and the fuels it produces contribute to a significant proportion of global emissions. This is an early attempt to encourage FIs to apply the no-harm principle to the sector and steer their customers to support accelerated climate action and governance, strategic investments in innovation and carbon technologies, increased portfolio share of alternative, hybrid and renewable sectors, and improved society and community support and respect for human rights. The guidance equips FIs with proven and effective methodologies and practices for promoting sustainable and responsible business practices in the oil and gas sector. The scope of the document is limited to the 3 operational components of its life cycle, namely the upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors. Page 4, please. The upstream sector, can you go to page 4, please? The upstream sector involves the exploration for petroleum, crude oil, and natural gas. Also known as the exploration and production sector, it includes the searching for potential underground and underwater oil and gas fields, drilling of exploratory wells, and subsequently operating the wells that recover and bring the petroleum, crude oil, or raw natural gas to the surface. The midstream sector involves storing, marketing, and transporting of petroleum, crude oil, natural gas, and natural gas liquids, though some midstream operations may be included in the downstream sector. The downstream sector involves the refining of petroleum, crude oil, and the processing of raw natural gas into products such as liquefied petroleum gas, gasoline or petrol, other fuel oils, petrochemicals, and lubricants. And it also includes the selling, distribution, and marketing of oil and gas products, such as gas distribution companies and retail stations. While this summary does not include the economic, ESG, and regulatory context, it is important to note that these are important considerations that has been taken into account in coming up with this guide. These can be found, the details can be found in the guide. Along the value chain of the oil and gas sector, there are various material, environmental, and social risks in addition to the financial risks that can continue to threaten the performance, value creation, and preservation of the assets. There is merit in the concept of dual materiality, where you identify the ESG risks that impact your oil and gas customers' business, and also the impacts of the business on the environment and society. In both instances, there could be financial implications, and FI should consider aligning material matters with national or sectoral focus areas. On page 5, please. This table provides a brief description of various ESG impacts and risk transmission across various stages of the oil and gas life cycle. The list is not comprehensive and have been adapted from various internationally accepted frameworks, such as the Climate Action 100+ Net Zero Company Benchmark, Bloomberg NEF Oil and Gas Business Model Transition Scores, Barclays Environmental and Social Risk Briefing on Oil and Gas, and good practices of companies derived from Dow Jones Sustainability Index and Morningstar. These impact areas and risks can have financial and reputational implications, but also present significant opportunities to deliver stakeholder value when proactively managed. Environmental harm, including greenhouse gas emissions, is responsible for global heating, which further triggers natural disasters and extreme climate conditions which affect oil and gas operations. The following risk and impact areas can severely affect issuer credit quality due to the mounting liabilities from environmental remediation, fines, and litigation from consumers, civil society, and even government. For example, under the land-related category, changes in land use patterns can affect access and continuity of subsistence and economic activities for the local and indigenous communities. Likewise, displacement and involuntary resettlement of these communities and the use of their customary land without free, prior, informed consent and potentially inadequate compensation is another key identified risk. There is also the risk of potential land clearing, loss of vegetation, impact on wildlife and biodiversity, and encroachments on protected or high conservation value areas. This will also lead to the potential biodiversity loss and deforestation. Page 6, please. In the upstream sector, key climate risks include greenhouse gas, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides emissions from combustion, and CO2 emissions from venting and flaring, while emissions from combustion of fuel burning equipment that generate steam, heat, and electricity for the process and operations are key risks identified in the midstream and downstream segments of the value chain. These emissions can contribute to climate change and acid rain air quality. There are also other identified environmental risks, namely overuse of water and its discharge to rivers and oceans, as well as what you can see on page 7, the generation and disposal of various types of hazardous waste, including oil leaks and spills. Next slide, please. On this slide, on page 8, it lists some of the key identified social risks. Social inequalities and unrest, community exploitation and chaos are a threat to securing a license to operate. For instance, opposition from communities and even governments can potentially delay the development of reserves or significantly increase the full cycle cost, making them unviable, thus making it difficult to plan for growth and assure returns on capital. Similarly, oil and gas players have to incur high costs to educate and ensure safety and compliance with local regulations, especially in offshore operations. Here, the 3 key areas of concern that would need attention are labor rights and working conditions, occupational health and safety, as well as human rights and community relations. Lastly, on page 9, governance is another key risk that have been identified. However, for offshore operations, the governance mechanism of host countries is a key consideration as it may increase the risk and cost of compliance due to revenue transparency, risk of bribery, and corruption. There is also the risk of social and political unrest and conflict that may affect the operations of the company. Page 11, please. In assessing these risks and impacts, FI should develop different sets of metrics and indicators for different categories of ESG risk. Where the metrics or indicators are policies, FI should investigate if such policies are supported with time-bound programs, targets, management accountability, and oversight. The next step would be for the FIs to assign appropriate risk scores or levels for each of the impact indicator. FIs should consider factors such as the likelihood and materiality of impact-based risk, consideration of stakeholders' interest, and national priorities and targets. The assessment should include, where relevant, an analysis of the severity of the environmental risk, as well as capacity, commitment, and track record of the customer in managing such risk. Transactions with higher environmental risk should be subjected to an in-depth due diligence, which may include site visits and independent review by environmental risk specialists. As you can see from the risk score level column, there are level 1 and level 2 assessments, as Dr. Kish mentioned earlier. These assessments can be undertaken in phases depending on the risk appetite, the maturity of ESG adoption and integration, and level of ESG governance of the respective FIs. Where necessary and relevant, FIs may choose to partner with experts and external assurance bodies to conduct various assessments and generate evidence-based reports. The level 1 preliminary assessment can be objective, mainly to determine if the businesses produce, track, and monitor the most fundamental or widely accepted metrics using a polar yes or no question, and a yes, whereby a yes would qualify positive scoring, and a no would just attract a negative or 0 scoring. The next level of assessment could be subjective, where specific thresholds or parameters could be set by FIs, assigning weightages or different scores based on a qualitative assessment of the extent of fulfilling the set thresholds and parameters, year-on-year reduction in negative impact, or positive impact from various measures taken, such as technology deployment and policy enforcement. Page 12, please. On page 12 and the next few slides, we'll provide a summary of the various risk categories that have been identified for the sector, and also the potential sources of metrics to be used, as well as a high-level guidance on deriving the risk score levels. On page 14, we will look at the potential mitigation and remedial measures for the risk that have been identified. FI should review the broad mitigation strategies of their customers in the context of their outcomes and how they will support the sector's overarching climate and energy transition strategies. Amongst others, FIs and oil and gas operators are encouraged to adopt a science-based approach where possible and comply with industry and international standards, prioritize reducing overall carbon intensity in operations, and prioritize an equitable and justice-based energy transition strategies that respect the rights of local communities. For example, under the land-related risk, potential measures to look out for include making provisions for compensation for relocation or loss of livelihoods that cannot be avoided, selection of sites where the effects of the environment and local infrastructure are minimized, planning construction of access routes by taking into account land issues, long-term disturbances from traffic and population density, and implementing a decommissioning and rehabilitation plan with periodic review. In terms of the risk of biodiversity loss and deforestation, companies should consider measures such as using the Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA, to identify protected areas and sensitivities to determine potential environmental impact of a proposed development. Second, to put in place a habitat restoration and rehabilitation plan. Also, engagement with local communities and stakeholders on biodiversity management, monitoring overlaps between oil and gas concessions and biodiversity sensitive areas, minimizing clearing of vegetation, and to avoid nationally and internationally recognized high conservation value areas, and lastly, devising a coastal management plan. Similarly, under climate change and emissions risk, there are various measures that companies can take, including taking stock of emissions inventory and having an air quality management plan, having a decarbonization strategy to meet greenhouse gas reduction targets, such as through commitments to green revenues, investing towards transitioning to sustainable energy and low carbon fuel portfolios, improving operational efficiency and reducing emissions in upstream operations, improving energy efficiency of refineries, in addition to solutions such as carbon offsetting and carbon intensity reduction, reducing greenhouse gas intensive activities, and deploying efficient technologies to reduce emissions, for example, using carbon capture and storage technology. And lastly, increasing operational resilience through a climate change adaptation. This is a process which involves identification of risk and vulnerabilities, planning, assessment, and selection of options, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. On page 16, we can see that there are other risks that needs to be mitigated, and these are risks relating to water consumption, pollution and waste, labor rights and working conditions, as well as governance. In the interest of time, I shall not go through these various measures to mitigate these risks, and the details can be referred to in the guidance document. A key point for FIs to note is that in assessing these risk mitigating strategies, FI should include a clear and comprehensive terms and conditions in the contractual agreements with the counterparties, which require the oil and gas operator to adhere to the following steps in managing the various risks and the impacts, such as having an understanding for the need to build a risk-averse culture among employees and across levels and functions, ensuring that the oil and gas operator develops and maintains emergency plans conforming to regulatory requirements, mainly to manage the response operations and associated external issues, ensuring the operator has identified the competency level for the respective positions that may have significant impact on the ESG performance, and to ensure that the respective personnel have the appropriate experience, qualifications, and training to undertake these important risk control measures. In terms of performance management of the sector portfolio on page 17, FIs are encouraged to undertake regular client monitoring and reviews to ensure clients' compliance to FI's ESG policies. This will help FIs to understand the material issues that clients face periodically and help them identify and resolve problems with a view to positively influence their sustainability performance and minimize risk. FIs should establish appropriate performance tracking and reporting mechanisms to adequately monitor the impact-based performance based on the impact measures and indicators established through a time-bound plan. An action plan can be mandated to the oil and gas players seeking finance at two stages, either at a point of credit assessment, whereby performance status and specific ESG metrics can be reviewed upfront, or at a point of sanction of financing facility with conditions to be fulfilled in different areas of ESG that may be material and relevant to the type and quantum of financing. Performance status or progress of the action plan should be requested periodically, for example, on a quarterly or half-yearly basis, so that necessary support can be extended by the FIs to help manage or mitigate ESG risk or accelerate ESG integration and implementation. This can include the offering of training programs, skills and knowledge transfer, as well as other support that may help the oil and gas players to improve on the implementation of the action plan. This action plan, at the minimum, should include the following components. 1, a summary report on the assessment of ESG risks and exposures, dual materiality and the priority areas of focus and improvement. 2, a clear statement on the type and quantum of financing that has been approved, either based on the current ESG performance or with specific conditions to improve it. 3, a definite and reasonable period of tracking of these performance improvements, depending on the size of business as well as the type of financing and ESG risk exposure. 4, a globally established and locally relevant set of material ESG metrics, thresholds, performance targets, and outcomes that will be tracked or monitored over a predetermined period. 5, an absolute statement on incentives as well as disincentives to motivate oil and gas operators to invest time and resources to improve ESG performance. And lastly, an expected reporting format, frequency, and channels to ensure the ESG performance is transparent to all key stakeholders of business. On page 18, please. In situations where ESG performance is not aligned to the action plan above, remedial measures may be introduced. FIs should establish remedial measures for the identified high-impact-based risk oil and gas players. FIs should also clearly distinguish remedial measures as associated with rectification plans, where immediate or non-negotiable corrective measures can minimize negative ESG impact, and secondly, performance plans, where long-term measures can help improve net positive impact of the business. The idea is to bring ESG risk exposure to a level that is acceptable to the FIs. FIs can also offer two sets of remedial measures: steps that can be taken by the oil and gas players and advisory support that can be offered by the FIs, depending on their capacity and initial push to manage ESG risk exposure. For instance, as part of its remedial measures, FIs can facilitate appropriate nurturing programs for its stakeholders, such as collaborating with relevant government agencies and NGOs to provide training programs and advisory services on sustainable oil and gas practices, conduct a regular workshop for FIs customers to share experience and knowledge with the support of relevant external parties, offer green financial products to incentivize clients to improve on the sustainability practices, and setting aside part of the total financing to the client for relevant certifications. In addition, FI should establish clear escalation procedures by identifying complex or controversial cases, and these cases should be escalated to a higher committee, such as Group Sustainability Committee, for further deliberation. A maximum term within which improvements must take place to address non-compliance and conduct the rectification plans for remedies, with the exception of instances where substantial improvements have been made and full compliance is within reach. And lastly, penalties such as increased or step-up pricing, temporarily suspending availability of existing and new financing facilities. Exit procedures, although an option of last resort, can be an option or can be an outcome of the process if the clients are not meeting a satisfactory progress levels, taking into account existing contractual agreements. FIs can establish exceptions to the remedies and exit procedures in accordance to the FI's sustainability guiding principles, as well as the quality of their business relationships, and most importantly, FI's own approach and strategy to manage ESG performance of the respective customers. FI should engage with the disclosing companies to support them to effectively communicate the value of their action. They can also support the investor community by highlighting the financial materiality of ESG risk and advise portfolio companies on how to engage with the issue. In conclusion, FIs can play an important role of evaluating the impact and make it comparable to relevant baselines and benchmarks. To motivate action, FI should drive home the critical need to address social and environmental challenges, mainly because it makes business sense to manage the risk and optimize the opportunities at the same time. This comes to the end of my presentation. I hope it has provided you with a snapshot of the guidance document. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nazir Beg. That was Nazir Beg, Regional Head of Strategic Initiatives for Islamic Banking from CIMB Islamic Bank Berhad. And a reminder to all of you joining us, please keep the comments coming. And also, if you have any questions pertaining to Mr. Nazir's briefing just now, we will pose those questions, time permitting, to Nazir and also all our speakers after this. After each section's presentation or each sector's presentation, we will have a quick Q&A session before we move on to the next sector. So please keep them the comments coming. And now I would like to introduce Miss Nur Suhaila Uthman to talk about Petronas net zero carbon emission aspirations by 2050. This is a very relevant topic, as we've mentioned earlier. As we push towards renewable, a net zero carbon emission aspiration is very, very important, especially for one of the biggest oil and gas players in the whole world. So please welcome Nur Suhaila Uthman, the custodian for environment and natural resources of Group Health, Safety and Environment of Petronas Petroleum Nasional Berhad. Ms. Suhaila.
Thank you, Luqman, for the introduction. Assalamualaikum and good morning to all tuning in this morning. I'm live streaming from our terminal in Keteh, Terengganu. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank IBIM for inviting Petronas to share our experience in mainstreaming sustainability into our operations. Next slide, please. Petronas has always been committed to conduct our business in an ethically, socially, and environmentally responsible manner. As early as 1977, we put in place a Health, Safety, Environment Management System, or HSE, to monitor our HSE performance. As the time goes by, we evolve from HSE focus into the broader sustainability space with the intention to deliver long-term social benefits to the communities wherever we operate. So in 2001, Petronas Corporate Sustainability Framework was conceptualized to step up efforts on sustainability. and to define what sustainability means to Petronas and steer the direction of our sustainability journey, a corporate sustainability council, which made up of senior management members from across Petronas businesses, was established. Some of the early successes are the introduction of Petronas Carbon Commitment in 2012 and Petronas Human Rights Commitment in 2015. And in 2019, we set a short-term target to cap our greenhouse gas emission for Malaysia operation at 49.5 million tons by 2024. And along with that, come the target to increase renewable energy installed capacity of 3,000 megawatt by the same year. And as you may know, last year, in answering the call to move at faster pace in bending the curve on climate change, we declared an ambitious aspiration of net zero carbon emission by 2050. So next slide, please. So what is net zero carbon emission? So basically, it is an act of balancing the greenhouse gas emission with carbon offset. So our emission refers to the scope 1 and the scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 is direct emissions from the operations of our boilers, furnace, heaters, gas turbine, while scope 2 emission is the indirect greenhouse gas emission resulting from the purchased electricity and purchased steam. But this NZCE is one of our strategies in implementing our sustainability agenda under the lens of safeguarding the environment. It is a top-down direction for our operations to contemplate on greenhouse gas emission in decision-making, in planning, operational excellence, and business growth. The action plan in achieving NZCE are bucketed into 4 building blocks. Operational excellence, that is to operate with high energy efficiency. There are action plans on technology, innovations, and low carbon solution, and those that fall under the carbon offset or removal. So I will provide a bit more detail in the next slide, please. These are the building blocks of action items in our journey for NZCE 2050 aspirations. I wish to highlight that an essential contributor in achieving the balance is to ramp up on renewables. So the use of renewables in the form of solar panels, wind turbine, bioenergy, hydrogen energy for our own consumption can displace the existing scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. We are also developing carbon capture, utilization and storage technologies to reduce our greenhouse gas emission over medium to long term. In fact, to date, we have deployed our own membrane-based carbon dioxide separating technologies in some of our operational assets, and we are expected to deploy carbon capture and storage, or what you have heard, CCS, technology in offshore high CO2 field developments by 2025. Another offset opportunity is a nature-based solution. So that is leveraging on reforestation and avoided deforestation to generate a forest-based carbon offsets. Next slide, please. All these investments are not cheap, but make no mistake, they represent new business opportunities for technology and skill development, and by doing so, we get to be part of a solution to a global problem. On the social front, our efforts on greenhouse gas emission reduction will also complement our social commitment. We are already playing an active advocacy for policies that support net zero carbon emission through our involvement in the development of Malaysia National Energy Policy and Natural Gas Roadmap. Next slide, please. We believe Malaysia is well positioned to benefit from low carbon economy. You can see here the economic potential to Malaysia is quite substantial. An additional 11 to 16% of GDP from about 400 billion ringgit Malaysia of investment with potential of 300,000 new job creation to be expected. And reducing greenhouse gas emission requires all to participate. I hope that as Petronas move forward in this meaningful journey, others will follow suit to do their part in addressing this global challenge. So with that note, I end my presentation. Thank you for listening.
All right, thank you so much, Puan Nur Suhaila Othman from Petronas. Now, we do hope that these ambitious goals can be realized and can be achieved. Now, I think all of us have heard of the recent COP26 conference happening in Glasgow, Scotland in mid-July. when there's a renewed pressure and push for companies, entities, and also countries, big and small, to actually reduce the carbon footprint and to cut emissions. I would now like to welcome Dr. Chen Wei Li from Hibiscus Petroleum Berhad. Dr. Chen is the Vice President of New Energy Ventures, and she's going to talk about post-COP26, the energy transition strategy for Hibiscus. So Dr. Chen, take it away.
Thank you very much, Lokman. And I would like to thank the IBIM for inviting me to share in this town hall. And good morning to everyone, and I hope that you are all keeping well and safe. Yeah. So the release of the VBIAF sectoral guide for the oil and gas sector is really most timely, given that, Lokman, what you have mentioned is that COP26 has just come to an end last Friday. So I thought for this reason, it would be interesting if you could go through the salient outcomes of the COP26. Next slide, please. So I think, first of all, for this particular COP, it has been delayed for a year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And just prior to the COP26 in August of this year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change actually released their 6th assessment report. Yeah. And the findings are really quite grim. As you can see the chart on the top right-hand corner of the slide, it shows that at the end of last year, we have already reached an average temperature increase of 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level. So really we have less than 10 years left to actually limit the average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it is not surprised then that the UN General Assembly has called this decade a decade of actions. Now, this particular COP is also very important because in the Paris Agreement, countries who are signatory to the agreement are obliged to actually update their climate ambition, which is expressed in their nationally determined contribution, or NDC, and they're obliged to do it every 5 years. And 2020 represented the very first key milestone of the NDC update. So if you could go just have a look at this particular slide, the first key objective of the COP26 is really to meet the Paris goal of achieving not more than actually 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, although there's a flurry of net zero pledges that were announced just prior to the COP21, and this of course includes Malaysia as well as India. Now, including those pledges that were made within the COP, we are only able to succeed in bringing the average temperature increase down from a 3.2 degrees Celsius, and that is from the original pledges made in COP21, to a 2.4 degrees Celsius. Now, the second less desirable outcome of the long-awaited $100 billion on climate financing, of which the developed countries are supposed to mobilize on annual basis from 2020 onwards. So unfortunately, this money is not forthcoming. And in this particular COP, there's been an announcement of a further delay of this delivery to 2023. So this was really of a great disappointment to small island developing states who are actually depending on this fund for the purpose of climate change adaptation. Now, on a more positive front is that there's a group of private financial services, and very relevant to the audience here, that's actually controlling 40% of the global private assets, and they have pledged to focus more on the ESG investment. Now, the next 3 pledges are important because these are the pledges that Malaysia has supported. Firstly, to end deforestation by 2030. Secondly, a pledge to no longer build any new coal-fired power plants, and this was also announced in our 12 Malaysia plan. And thirdly, a pledge to reduce methane emissions. Yeah. Now, after 5 years of negotiation, COP26, a very important milestone is that we have finally reached a consensus on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Now, Article 6 is about creating a common rule book for international carbon markets, and reaching consensus has been very challenging due to some sticky issues, such as the treatment of carbon credit that was generated during the old Kyoto Protocol regime and double counting. But these issues were finally resolved in this particular COP. And this particular COP ended with a Glasgow Climate Pact inviting countries to announce a more ambitious emissions reduction by next COP, including a detailed action plan up to 2030, with a focus to phase down coal and to limit temperature of not more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, this particular climate pact is very important because without this pact, countries are only obliged to submit their revised NDC in the next milestone year, which is 2025. But we really can't wait for 2025 anymore. So I think the outcome of the COP26 is perhaps best summarized by the comment made by the Prime Minister of Barbados, who has called future COP to actually try harder. So next slide, please. So from COP26, I would like to give a very quick introduction. Next slide on hibiscus. So hibiscus petroleum is actually Malaysia's first listed independent oil and gas exploration and production company. We were listed on the main market of Bursa Malaysia in July 2011. So making this our 10th anniversary. And in December of last year, we were also accepted as a constituent of the FTSE4Good Bursa Malaysia Index. And our market cap as at the end of October this year is around 1.8 billion ringgit. And as you can see from the map on the left side of the slide, hibiscus has exploration, development, and production assets located in the UK, Australia, and Southeast Asia. And in Southeast Asia, we are actually mainly focused on Malaysia and very soon Vietnam. Now, in the UK, we have our first producing asset in the North Sea, a cluster of producing fields called the Anasuria, which we have acquired back in March 2016. And 2 years later, in March 2018, we made our second successful acquisition of North Sabah PSC from Shell, and Sea Hibiscus is the operator of the PSC. And today, Hibiscus is really very excited about our third acquisition of Repsol's upstream asset located in both Malaysia and Vietnam. And this particular acquisition, we counted it as transformative in terms of increasing 2P reserves, as well as our daily hydrocarbon production. Now in Malaysia, Hibiscus works very closely with our regulator Petronas, and we have received several recognitions from Petronas, as well as safety recognitions from ROSPA in the UK. And you can see that from the bottom right of the slide. Yeah. Next slide, please. So then in the next slide, Hibiscus, we are aware of the urgency of climate change. And as a responsible organization, we have a long-term energy transition strategy in place. We are committed to being a net zero emissions producer by 2050. Our aspirations has actually aligned with the UK government's legally binding target of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And also, of course, aligning with Petronas' own aspirations to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, as shared by Puan Sohaila in her earlier slide. Yeah. And of course, we are also aligning with the Malaysian government, who recently announced their commitment of reaching carbon neutrality as early as 2050. So as you can see from the slide here, our energy transition strategy is underpinned by 3 key pillars. Our first pillar is on the creation of a resilient portfolio of hydrocarbon assets. And this includes increasing natural gas resources and reserves in our portfolio. So as mentioned in the VBIAF Sectoral Guide, gas is the cleanest form of fossil fuel, and we will continue to have an important role in the energy transition. So this is another reason why our proposed acquisition of Repsol is transformative, in a sense that it increases tenfold of our gas in our portfolio. Currently, we hold about only 3% of gas in our portfolio. So once the acquisition is completed, we will have around 30% of gas here. And the second pillar focuses on decarbonizing our upstream operations. In developing a pathway towards being a net zero emissions producer, we understand the importance of developing our decarbonizing roadmap. And we are currently engaging and seeking collaboration with our regulators in both UK and Malaysia, as well as key technology providers, so we can deliver a commitment to reduce our carbon footprint. And also, we are pleased to inform that, in financial year 2021, we have made significant progress in terms of reducing our operational scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions. You can see from the slide here that our group absolute emissions has reduced by 6% compared to the financial year 2020, whereas our group emission intensity has reduced by 18% over over the same period. And lastly, for the last pillar, we recognize that investment opportunities in technologies that may complement the decarbonization of oil and gas sector, which will arise from time to time. And in this regard, our board has approved our set of investment criteria, and we are on a continual lookout in a structured and disciplined manner for such opportunities. And our investment criteria will only allow us to consider opportunities that are sustainable, profitable, and also preferably adjacent to our industry while we leverage on our existing capabilities. Yeah. So examples of such investment that are adjacent to our industry include the carbon capture, utilization, and storage, which offers deep decarbonizing solution for carbon-intensive sectors. And lastly, our energy transition strategy is supported by foundations actually premised on our strong social and governance values, which we have built over the years. And important to just conclude from this particular slide that our energy transition is a long-term journey. The outcomes of our strategy are expected to contribute to relevant UN SDG goals. And next slide, please. The next slide will be my final slide. I'm conscious of the time, so I will stop here. And I'm happy to take any questions during the Q&A session. Over to you, Luqman.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Chen. It's great sharing. I would like to ask you to stay on the line as I welcome back our previous two presenters for the sector, Mr. Nazir Bek of CIMB Islamic and Puan Nur Suhaila Uthman from Petronas. We have about 15 minutes for the Q&A. So I would like to urge you guys again, anyone watching and everyone watching on YouTube, please drop your comments. We will take the questions that are suitable, time permitting. For questions that we do not have time to take, we will actually compile them on the IBEAM website later for you to see the answers to your questions. ibeam.com. You can also email your questions to VBI. That's VBI@ibeam.com. All right, I would like to get straight to it. I'd like to start with Mr. Nazir. Mr. Nazir, when are financial institutions expected to adhere to these guidelines, and will these guidelines be made mandatory?
Thank you, Luqman, for the question. At this stage, the adoption and implementation of the guidelines in this document by financial institutions are voluntary. The applicability of the best practices and frameworks that have been prescribed in this guidance document should be determined by the respective FIs based on various considerations, including their risk appetite, their maturity and preparedness to integrate sustainability principles into their business models, their ability to build their own capacity, as well as their long-term aspirations to align and support organizational and national agenda of sustainable development. One of the observations in our numerous discussions among the financial institutions in our working group is that in terms of the sustainability-related frameworks and processes, there are varying levels of preparedness among the different institutions. Hence, it will take more time for some to develop the capabilities and capacity as compared to some others that's further ahead in this journey. Also, as mentioned earlier, this is an early attempt to put together a guiding framework for the sector, and therefore I think it will take a bit of time for everyone to get up to speed. However, the growing pressures from not only regulators, but investors who are pushing the transition away from carbon-based fuels will continue to accelerate. The emerging regulations and national policies to support the global goals under the Paris Agreement will continue to shape the future performance of the sector. If financial institutions are not taking steps to prepare for these evolving requirements and standards that impose on the sector, there could be performance and credit-related risks on their respective portfolios. In summary, I just want to say that the implementation of these guidelines, though it's not mandatory, it is highly, highly recommended.
All right, thanks, Mr. Nazir. Puan Suhaila, what drives Petronas to commit to the net zero carbon emission by 2050, just under 30 years from now?
Yeah. Various leading organizations and institutions already declared climate change will remain to be the greatest threat to global human health for many years to come. So Petronas, as a player in energy sector, realized that we want to be part of the solution to this global problem. But to do so, we have to go beyond energy efficiency, beyond reducing flaring and venting, beyond checking our leaks and repair. A fundamental shift is needed for all organizations to move towards a more sustainable future. So Petronas wants to be that sustainability beacon in Malaysia, and that will enable us to grow our business and societies for decades to come.
Just one more question for Puan Suhaila before I move on to Dr. Chen. Can you elaborate more on the efforts of Petronas on renewable energy and the switch and the pivot to renewable energy?
Thank you, Lokman. For a number of years now, we have been advocating the use of gas and renewables in transitioning towards low carbon economy. So in Malaysia, Petronas generated approximately 28,000 megawatt hour of electricity from our solar farms, which is translated to greenhouse gas emission reduction of about 19,000 metric ton CO2 equivalent. So in 2019, Petronas acquired 100% interest in M+, a company specializing in solutions for rooftop and ground-mounted solar power generation for market in India, the Middle East, and Asia. And in July 2020, we were commissioned by Tesco Stores Malaysia to provide a solar rooftop solution covering the design, installation, operation, and maintenance of solar panels for 15 Tesco stores in Malaysia. And from my presentation just now, I've shared that we have set a short-term target of 3 gigawatt installed renewable energy capacity by 2024, and we are, inshallah, on track to achieve the target.
All right, Dr. Chen, hibiscus petroleum is also obviously a very important player in the oil and gas industry. So under the current climate and energy transition pressure, what is the future of the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lokman. Certainly a very appropriate question, especially post the COP26. Yeah. I think if you have a look at the findings from all the studies, like for example, the IEA, McKinsey and Company, as well as even for BP Energy Outlook, and I think if I recall correctly, even for the VBIAF sectoral guide, it does shows that even by 2050, we are talking about fossil fuel composition of, dropping from 80% in 2020 down to between 20 to 70%, depending on what scenario we are looking at. But I think the key message here is that fossil fuel will still be around by 2050, although the pressure at the moment is very much centering on coal. But I think for the oil and gas, the key takeaway from this particular COP26 is to really manage the methane emissions. And also there are some, besides just looking at decarbonizing our footprint, there are some sectors that are really hard to abate, not easily abate, like for example, the transportation sector, the aviation and the maritime sector. And also there are many products that are very much hydrocarbon based. But I think importantly is that while oil and gas operates, we have to operate in a very responsible manner and at the same time go through this transformative process in order to remain relevant by 2050. Yeah. And I think a very important message that also came out in the recent months is that we have seen a very severe energy crunch that's happening in the UK and EU, and of course also affecting China. Yeah, in that, while I think the investment in fossil fuel due to government pressure and also of course the investors and the banks, they have been actually pulling back from the fossil fuel, but in this, in haste of doing this, and renewables are not actually keeping up in tandem to close the gap, we have come out with a very soaring fossil fuel price. I think in moving towards an energy transition, we have to be careful that it should be orderly and well managed, so we do not actually upset the energy trilemma that is trying to balance between energy affordability, security, and environment sustainability. And I think I'll stop here and back to you, Lokman.
All right, I think that brings me to my next question, because all these plans are good and admirable, but they are plans and largely they are on paper. So what are the challenges faced in actually operationalizing this and your energy transition strategy, Dr. Chen?
Yeah, okay. Also another very good question. And actually decarbonizing is actually not an all easy solutions to us. Sure, there are some decarbonizing initiatives which we term them as a lower hanging fruit, and whereby when we deploy them, it also helps us to reduce our OPEX. For example, improving energy efficiency and also fuel switching. Like for example, Hibiscus in our unmanned platform, we have actually been on a continuous switch from diesel genset to a hybrid of solar PV and wind. But then when it comes to really the deep decarbonizing, for example, if I can quote the CCUS, these are really very capex intensive to deploy. And also secondly, of course, if you want to deploy them, we have to also look at our PSC lifeline. And if they have a very short runway, then it really does not make sense to actually deploy them unless, of course, the PSC is extended. It makes sense to deploy these high capex decarbonizing initiatives. And also for Hibiscus, we are specialists in the midlife assets, and midlife assets typically have very high CO2 content compared to the younger fuels. So these are also some challenges that we have to manage. And I think last but certainly the most important challenge is really whether the government can provide incentives, provide a carrot, or if not a carrot, then the ground the stick, in terms of the carbon pricing to actually drive decarbonizing efforts.
All right.
Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. So again, I'd like to remind all of you watching on YouTube, we do welcome your questions. We want two-way communication. So please feel free to comment on whichever YouTube channel or app that you are watching. We'll try and ask your questions to the panelists and the presenters that we have today. And if we do not have the time to actually cover all the questions, we will compile them later on the IBEAM website at ibeam.com. You can also email your questions regarding today's presentations to vbi@ibeam.com. Now, before we wrap up this section and this sector, actually, I'd like to pose one last question to Puan Suhaila of Petronas. Puan Suhaila, climate change, of course, can impact water resource and biodiversity. So what are Petronas's approaches on the management of water, biodiversity, and also natural resources as you strive to do that without compromising performance?
Thanks, Lukman. Many people may not be aware that water is actually essential to our operations. It is used in our production process for cooling purpose, and of course to generate steam for our turbines. So the efficient use of water is built into the design of our plants based on the concept of reduce, reuse, and recycle. So wherever we can reuse and recycle the water, we will do so. So we take proactive measures to ensure water optimization and minimize wastage. Standards and guidelines have been established to set the minimum requirements, optimum operating conditions, and maintenance practices to ensure reliable performance of our water systems. And we conduct water balance verification regularly to ensure that we report accurately the water that we use and identify further optimization opportunities. On biodiversity, we are committed to promoting biodiversity conservation to minimize the impact from our operations and project development. So early on, biodiversity and ecosystem service risk assessment been conducted through the environmental impact assessment process, and we adopt and we implement the mitigation measures recommended and with the EIA report, and apply some industry best practices and guidelines to avoid and minimize those impacts. We also identify opportunities for biodiversity protection, conservation, and to ensure that our operation does not impact the biodiversity ecosystem service surrounding our communication. We also communicate a lot on biodiversity through training, as well as internal and external presentation to our employees, our contractors, and the communities. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Puan Suhaila, and I'd like to thank again Mr. Nazir Beg, the Regional Head of Strategic Initiatives Islamic Banking for CIMB Islamic Bank Berhad, Puan Suhaila Uthman, the Custodian of Environment and Natural Resources of Group Health, Safety and Environment of Petronas, and of course Dr. Chen Waini, the Vice President of New Energy Ventures of Hibiscus Petroleum Berhad. see you again soon, hopefully. And for all of you, you can also email your questions to vbi@ibim.com. We will take a short 5-minute break. After this, we'll return with the presentations for the next sector, manufacturing. Please make sure you stick around. Don't go anywhere. I'll see you shortly. thanks for your patience. We will now move on to the presentations for the second sector of the day, manufacturing. Now, although the impacts of COVID-19 and the lockdowns have been varying on the manufacturing industry, some have been thriving, some have been affected, but there's no denying that the whole industry is facing increased competition. Now, how does the industry actually remain competitive, and each company within the industry remain competitive in this country while also maintaining effectiveness and also low cost, including labor costs, to continue attracting high value FDI or foreign direct investment? Now, I would like to invite on Ms. Juliana Tan Abdullah to give the briefing on the guidance document on the manufacturing sector. Juliana is the Senior Vice President and Head of Group Operational and Islamic Banking Risk from the Group Risk Management of Alliance Bank Berhad. So Ms. Juliana, take it away.
Morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Lokman, for the introduction. Before I proceed further, I would just like to extend my appreciation and gratitude to the Manufacturing Sectoral Working Group, namely the community of practitioners, Maybank Islamic, Public Islamic, Afin Islamic and Standard Chartered Sadiq, the technical experts, Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, Worldwide Fund, World Bank and SIRIM, to name a few, and also a special shout out to the Alliance Islamic Secretariat team, Alia, Elaine and Gafino, for your tireless work and coordinating the meetings and documents. For this session, I will brief on the Manufacturing Sectoral Guide. We will start off with an introduction where we'll look at the aim and applicability of the sectoral guide. Next, we'll provide an overview in terms of the sector context, definition, as well as scope of the Manufacturing Sectoral Guide. The main components that we will discuss would be the impact-based risk management system, covering the risk identification, measurement, as well as mitigation. We will also touch a little bit on the exclusion list and the performance management, and round out the presentation with remedial measures and approaches. The underlying thrust of value-based intermediation is to create value to the economy, community, and environment without compromising the financial returns to the shareholders. These were the objectives that we had in mind when we crafted the Manufacturing Sectoral Guide. It aims to provide guidance and metrics in creating a holistic approach to promote value-based intermediation practices. From a financial institution viewpoint, the sectoral guide provides guidance on areas or criteria that can be considered in the assessment of VBI practices for financing or investment activities. At the same time, the sectoral guide provides manufacturers an insight of the areas assessed and considered in promoting VBI practices by financial institutions. Nonetheless, the sectoral guide is meant strictly as a guidance document. Its implementation and applicability is very much dependent on the FI policies, risk appetite, strategies, and maturity to integrate VBI or sustainable practices in their business model. For this second cohort, there were 3 sectoral guides: oil and gas, which you guys heard earlier, manufacturing, and then infrastructure. So the question asked is, why manufacturing? Why was it chosen and why a sectoral guide is needed? Well, it's the second highest economic sector that contributes to 24% of Malaysian GDP for Q1 2021. It also provides employment to 17% of total employment force. And in a survey by KPMG in 2020, Malaysia ranks 4th among 17 economies viewed as a competitive manufacturing hub. And the government is also pushing high-value investments in the manufacturing and services sector, especially in the areas of technology and innovation. In short, this sector has a significant multiplier effect on the nation's activities and growth. By virtue of that, it's only appropriate that a sectoral guide on VBI is drafted to encourage financial institutions to apply the no-harm principles to the sector and accelerate VBI, sustainability, and responsible business practices in the manufacturing sector. In terms of definition, we fall back to the Industrial Coordination Act 1975. In short, manufacturing is a process of converting raw materials into products or goods for sale or use. However, it does not include any activity normally associated with retail or wholesale trade. It also excludes milling of fresh palm oil fruits into crude palm oil, milling of paddy into rice, and production and processing of raw natural rubber. In drafting the sectoral guide for manufacturing, the aim was to provide a guide that can be applied across the manufacturing sector rather than zooming in on specific industry or activity. The view taken is that it will be more beneficial to the financial institutions as well as the industry to have a bird's eye view of the entire industry instead of focusing on one or two activity within the manufacturing sector. As such, the scope of the sectoral guide for manufacturing covers the manufacturing life cycle, which comprises of three main stages. First stage is inputs, which covers the raw materials, suppliers, and capital. The second stage is operations, which is the gist of the manufacturing operations, which this would include the infrastructure, the equipments, the technology, packaging, as well as logistics and distribution. And the last stage is the output, which is the product that is produced. Nonetheless, to provide context and example on how to apply the sectoral guide, we have provided illustration on three main activities, namely electrical and electronics, plastics, iron and steel. The reason why we provide specific examples to these three sectors were that they were a substantial contribution to the manufacturing sector in terms of performance, sales value, or impact on the environment and community. Electrical and electronics is a top performing industry in 2020 and is also the top three subsectors in terms of sales value, and it also is Malaysia's largest export. As such, the industry has a high impact on carbon emission and footprint. For plastics, it's widely used in the manufacturing sector. Here we look at plastic users, plastic manufacturers, as well as waste manager. This is another carbon-intensive activity with substantial impact on economic and environmental costs. Similarly, for iron and steel, this is another carbon-intensive manufacturing activity, and it is also widely used in a lot of sectors such as automobiles, consumer durables, and infrastructure and construction industry. Moving on. In terms of the risk management system, we start off with risk identification. For the manufacturing sector, we have structured it based on the manufacturing life cycle of input, operations, and output. And at each stage of the life cycle, the risk impact category is identified based on the category of environment, social, and governance aspects. This is very much in line with the main thrusts of VBI, which are on preservation of economy, community, and environment. The identified risk impact can be viewed in terms of the financial impact, for example, the cost of remediation, fines and penalties, as well as the reputational implications. However, when we look at the risk impact, we not only look at the negative impact, but we should also look at the positive impacts. There are also areas when proactively managed represents significant opportunities to deliver stakeholder value. Hence, it's imperative that we identify and balance the trade-offs between the positive and negative impact. In the risk identification, in assessing the risk, we also should look at the dual materiality concept. So basically, this means identifying risks that impact the manufacturing customer's business, and on the flip side, the impact of your customer's business on the environment and society. For example, climate changes impacts the manufacturers, whereby manufacturing activities can be disrupted due to drought, floods, scarcity of raw materials, etc. And manufacturing activities itself contributes to carbon emissions, high non-structural waste, or pollution to the environment. So when assessing the risk, we should look at both sides of the coin. Slide 5 provides an illustration of the transition risk, physical risk, and financial risk of the manufacturing sector, while slide 6 provides an illustration of the specific environmental, social, and governance factors that can be considered along the manufacturing life cycle. Please note that this list is non-exhaustive and is adapted from various international standards, such as Global Reporting Initiative, the IFC standards, as well as SDG's corporate reporting guidelines. And in the sectoral guide, we have actually provide detailed instructions for the 3 activities, which is electrical and electronics, plastic and iron and steel industries, beside the generic overall risk factors for the manufacturing sector. Once we have identified the risks, the next step is to develop a scoring methodology. So you have identified the risks, then we will identify the sources of metrics. And then the next step is to find a scoring methodology. This is really dependent on the maturity of the financial institutions in respect of their VBI practices. A simple scoring methodology can be an objective-based assessment with a yes or no responses. However, as the FI mature along the spectrum, a more definitive scoring with weightages assigned to different metrics can be performed in order to derive an overall rating of for example, high, medium, or low. Here, we provided examples of metrics that we considered for the various E and ESG elements. Okay, moving on to the risk mitigations. When we talk about mitigations, this should be clearly conveyed to the customers in the terms and conditions or contractual agreements. As a guide, the following 3 steps can be undertaken. The first step is to identify the applicable laws, regulations, standards, and certifications that is applicable to the customers. This is a good starting point as compliance to regulations and laws is a mandatory requirement. So for the manufacturing sector, there are standards or acts that would be applicable across the board. However, there are also applicable standards. There are also relevant standards that are only applicable to certain sectors. For example, food safety management systems would most likely be applicable to the food and beverage manufacturers. So it's good to identify those generic standards as well as those specific standards that are applicable to the manufacturer. The next step is to identify, encourage, and require specific commitments on VBI or sustainable practices by the customers. For example, the My Hijau program is a good government incentive to support development of green technology. And the final step is to identify the impact-based non-compliance breaches. This is to ensure that commitments are tracked and complied. There could be a possibility of imposing consequences if these commitments are not met, for example, in the form of higher pricing. The next slide provides an illustration of some of the risk mitigation and remedial measures that can be undertaken under the environmental, social, and governance ambit. Okay, at this stage, we'd like to share a little bit on the exclusion list. Some financial institutions do have an exclusion list, which basically serve as a baseline risk appetite for the financial institution. This list basically outlines the areas or activities that the FIs would not extend financing or deal with. And it is very much dependent on the risk appetite and strategy of the financial institutions with respect of their VBI stance or practices. This sample provided in the sectoral guide is non-exhaustive and is very much dependent on the risk appetite, maturity level, and strategy of the FIs. And it can be expanded to be more granular as the maturity level increases. The general rule of thumb is that the activities that are in a breach of national and international laws with irreversible ESG impacts will normally be part of the exclusion list. After all this, we'll look at the performance management, which is basically to ensure that customers comply with the committed and agreed time-bound plan in respect of VBI practices. There will be regular monitoring and reviews, and the review frequency is normally adjusted according to the customer's ESG risk level. This could be done at the point of assessment, during credit reviews, or if there is adverse news regarding the customer. So a normal action plan would normally include a summary report on the ESG risk assessments, a caveat based on ESG performance, benchmarks, metrics, as well as incentives or disincentives to motivate the manufacturers to improve ESG performance, and then as well as a reasonable time frame for ESG performance tracking. We have also provided an example of a reporting format here. Fine. Yeah, I think I've come to the The last part is actually in terms of the remedial measures and approaches. So most financial institutions will take a nurturing approach in promoting and encouraging VBI practices. These would include collaboration with government agencies, NGOs to provide training and awareness, probably conduct regular workshops. And as part of the funding, some financial institutions may offer green financial products as incentives for clients to improve of their sustainability. And this may also include setting aside financing in the form of preferential rates for the clients for certification. Okay. So despite this nurturing approach, we should also have, financial institutions will have established clear escalation procedures for non-compliances breaches. Okay. So for example, complex or controversial cases would normally be escalated upward to a higher committee. For example, the credit committee or the sustainability committee. And then there would be penalties established and action plans for events of default. The customers would normally be provided a maximum term for improvements to address the non-compliances and conduct the rectification plans. As a last resort, if all these fail, the last resort would be to exit the customers. Okay. With that, I've come to the end of my presentation. It's hoped that the Sectoral Guide for Manufacturing will provide an insight to the principles and actions required to implement VBI and sustainability practices in the manufacturing sector. Inshallah, with it, we can strive towards strengthening practices which are in line with Sharia principles of sustainable and inclusive development that are beneficial to the economy, environment, and community. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Puan Juliana from Alliance Bank for Heart. Now, manufacturing is also one of the biggest contributors to the economy of the country, but if done incorrectly, it can also have one of the largest carbon footprints. Therefore, ESG, environmental social governance, always has to be considered. These are non-financial sectors that have to be considered in planning for the future. So here to share about ESG concerns faced by Malaysian manufacturers, I'd like to welcome Dato' Ashhadi Alias, a member of MMM Sustainability Development Committee and also from a member of the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, or FMM. So Dato' Ashhadi, take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Luqman Haris. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer, IBIM, the guys who are working very hard at the background, and I would like to thank so the MC today, and at the same time really thank from us from FMM giving us the chance today to share our experience and our challenges in terms of ESG, right? Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, let me, my presentation today will divide it into three. The first one talking about ESG context for manufacturing in general. And the second part is government incentive. And the third part is best practice sharing from Carry Ingredients Malaysia. All right, for the ESG challenges faced by manufacturers today, there are a lot of challenges. It is coming from every corners. And as you can see in the slide today, we have around 12 challenges that we face as manufacturers, right? And well, I think they are, among all these challenges, they are coming from within, from internal, from external, from all the stakeholders. Because the ESG topic has been really coming significant for the last 10 to 15 years in Malaysia. So it's kind of the community today is getting more and more aware on ESG, on climate change, global warming. So we as manufacturers, without exception, has to embrace that, right? So let's just quickly go through these 12 challenges, right? We as manufacturers or as a company, how do we connect sustainability with profitability? That's a huge challenge there. A lot of investment involved, a lot of resources involved, and I think with exception of the multinational companies, there are many manufacturers, especially the SMEs, are still in the process of understanding ESG framework implementation, and really putting sustainability as a means of doing business. So it is a long process, yes. So that's why these are the challenges to avoid. And other than that, it's about pressure from competitors, pressure from doing business, pressure from even in terms of governance. And especially now, if our clients are dealing with international customers, they're really interested on how much we involve in terms of ESG, right? And of course, in terms of reporting, in terms of transparency, so that is given. But just to ensure 100% implementation is really a tough challenge for some of us, right? Next slide, please. Okay, with that in mind, we have 12 challenges. Let's talk about how to incorporate sustainability in the manufacturing environment, right? First of all, is we need to identify what is relevant and important to business and stakeholders, and where the most impact would be. And this is when we talk about materiality assessment. Some of this consideration has been shared earlier under the presentation by speaker before me, and those are the risk identification, risk mitigation. So that has to be in place too, right? And in terms of sustainability, we have to have a lead, right? We have to have a lead, and because sustainability has a lot of stakeholders involved, right? It's not like one department by itself running the governance and that's it. It's sustainability is making sure the operation, the business is sustainable for in the longer run or even forever, right? So you need the right leader. You need to have the lead from the top to the site level, and this is no exception at all. You must have a good leader, and when you have a good leader, you need to have the right strategy, the right approach, and that's when you define the goals, sustainability goals. Right, those goals has to be measurable, has to be practical, has to be attainable over time, right? Because to us on the manufacturing sectors, we have come a long way from being in compliance, and then we are reaching out to the community. And now we're talking about the full sustainability. So these are the journeys. And of course, once you have the goals, you have a proper strategy, you need to communicate. You need to communicate to the team and presented the whole journey, the whole program. And of course, once you have implemented those programs, you need to have a monitoring, and you need to have a review of those programs. So it's a long journey. It's not complex. You have to start somewhere, start small, not to be ambitious, and you will take it one at a time, because as we all know, Malaysia as a country, we have a sustainability goals by 2030, 2050. So we have time, and we take it one at a time, not to rush, because we're talking about a sustainable operation and practices, right? Okay, next. Next slide, please. Okay, along the way, when we implement this external help us to achieve that. So the government incentive currently, we do have this green investment tax allowance, green investment tax allowance. We have green income tax allowance, tax exemption. So this scheme by Malaysian government first introduced in 2004, and it is in practice right now. And based on my personal experience, working with Malaysia Green Technology, MGTC, they are very helpful. They have they really facilitates our journey looking at a green investment, a green solution, green processes. So we as a manufacturing community, my recommendation, we must quickly look at this incentive, look at these tools, because it really does help in terms of financial returns and in terms of reducing the burdens of operational expenditures. Yeah, and you can see here the implementing agency is MIDA, MGTC, SEDA. You can always reach out to them, and they are fully ready and available to help us. So and all this the green project covers renewable energy, energy efficiency, green building, green certification, a green township, even a green data center, integrated, even waste management, right? But they are also additional scheme that they are going to introduce later, right? Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Okay. All right. Continuing on the government incentive, it's government incentive in terms of green technology financing scheme 3.0. This is under the even in the latest budget that was presented early last month, that RM 2 billion scheme will support the issue of SRI Sukuk and green bonds, and it's open for application until 31st December 2022. So these are a very good opportunity for us in manufacturing sector, that we should take advantage of that. And on top of that, government initiative in budget 2022 proposal, initiative to encourage low carbon emission through VCM, voluntary carbon market launch under the advocacy of Bursa Malaysia. Of course, on top of the previous slide, RM 1 billion low carbon transition facility by BNM for SMEs to adopt sustainable and low carbon practices. Actually, just to be on this note, for us who are not aware of this, please reach out to to FMM, we do have our own committee, sustainable development committee that can help manufacturing members in terms of assessing all these available scheme, available incentive for us to invest on green energy projects. All right. Tax exemption relief to encourage adoption electricity, a sustainable sukuk of up to RM20 billion for eligible social and environmentally friendly projects. All right, thanks. Next slide, please. Can you guys hear us? All right, so best practice. So now on the manufacturing challenges, it's just this is a best practice from Carry Ingredient Malaysia. That is how we do sustainability. We have started this journey since 2015. That was when the first sustainability agenda introduced. And if you compare with now, 2015 to 2021, it was already 6 years. And we have improved from the original sustainability agenda. Now we call it Beyond the Horizon. And from Carry perspective, other than we have our own vision where we value our partner and creating a world of sustainable nutrition. And our purpose, inspire food, nourish life, and our values, courage. These are 4 values that we believe that we can propel in the future in terms of sustainability. So under the Beyond the Horizon agenda, when in creating a world of sustainable nutrition, Carry Global is committing into 3 strategies. The first one, better for people, better for society, and third one is the better for planet. With these 3 strategies, we believe that we will achieve our Beyond the Horizon aspiration, where by the name of it, Beyond the Horizon, is that we strive to be better than others when facing the future challenges. So these 3 strategies, let me quickly go through. Better for people, where we aspire in terms of being business, we want to reach over 2 billion people with sustainable nutrition. And for better for society, making the science of healthier food accessible through Carry Health and Nutrition Institute. And overall is making sure that our business is giving more values in terms of people, human right, safety, safe and healthy workplace, and achieving the highest level of diversity and engagement. Of course, our business involve the community. And the last commitment is that better for planet, climate change. We are adopting the SBT for a 55% carbon reduction by 2030 and achieving net zero carbon by 2050. Other than carbon reduction of emission, we want to go for 100% renewable electricity by 2025, achieving 50% reduction of water intensity. And the rest are circular economy targets, and of course responsible sourcing. We want to go for 100% of priority raw materials sustainably sourced by 2030. Next slide, please. Okay, due to the time, I would like to quickly go. Okay, this is the sample of 3 strategies divided across procurement, direct materials, factory operation, and logistic supply chain. So the sustainability strategy covers all these value chains. Yeah. Next slide, please. Just for if you want more information in terms of Carry Global Sustainability Strategy and our achievement since the last 5 years, you can access all the links I provided here, and other independent link that verified our sustainability reporting. Next, I just would like to share our success stories in terms of projects that we have completed. These are the project, the heat recovery project using boiler economizer. We have installed solar panel installation in one of our factory in India. And definitely these projects are giving us a reduction in terms of carbon emission and also in terms of energy consumption. Next project is in terms of waste management. We want to feel that our waste will not go to landfill by 2025. So some of our waste is converted into fertilizer, and some of waste even converted to building material. Next, the last project will be the water project. That is part of our KPI, and the successful project that we did sites in China is that we call 8-meter cubic liter day, so it's 8-meter cubic liter a day. It's about 9%, 9.6% reduction, and examples from Carry industry. So I think I end my presentation with the slide. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share. Thank you, Lokman.
Thank you so much, Dato' Ashari. We do apologize to our audience for the brief connection interruption just now. Lucky Dato' was just about to finish. So I would like to ask Dato' to stay on as I invite again Puan Juliana Tan for us to fill the questions. We do have about 15 minutes for these questions before we move on to the next section. So I'll just like to get straight to it. Puan Juliana first. Puan Juliana, what is the appropriate action to be taken for clients which do not meet an acceptable level of ESG risk rating?
Yeah, thank you, Lokman, for the question. Like I say in my presentation, the approach taken mostly is on the nurturing and encouragement to the customers to comply with the time-bound agreed commitments or criteria that they have agreed to. However, in the event that they do not, we would have to insert additional clauses on positive evaluation from the existing performance within a reasonable time frame, and these can be formalized to contracts or action plans. So there will be a review and tracking mechanism to ensure that there are efforts put in by the customers to comply or at least achieve some of the commitments that they meet within the agreed time frame. As a last resort, as we say, if the client still cannot meet the agreed commitments within the time frame, we would have to phase out the ones that yearly did not put in an effort, were not prepared or unwilling to shift towards a more sustainable practices, and especially those that would have a higher impact-based risk.
All right, thank you, Puan Juliana. One more question for Puan before we move on to Dato'. So how can FIs use the VBIAF manufacturing guide to support a transition to net zero?
Yeah, when we drafted the sectoral guide, it is to be read or in conjunction with the Bank Negara's climate risk taxonomy. So this can be done by identifying climate risk. As you look at my presentation, we also included part of the climate risk matrix as part of the risk assessment. And then this could be used to assign risk scores to climate metrics, and then integrating climate criteria in the onboarding of customers' checklists, and adopting a range of nurturing measures to achieve the metrics in line with what was recommended in Bank Negara CCPT. So these are actually quite detailed out in the sectoral guide, especially on page 53. So the industry or the FIs can reference to the sectoral guide for that.
All right, Puan Juliana. So how can FIs prepare for the implementation of the manufacturing guide?
Okay, so like we mentioned, the sectoral guide is meant as a guidance document. So it's good for the industry as well as the FIs to familiarize themselves with the guide. Conducting internal training, awareness, I think one of the main factors in implementing a VBI practice or the sectoral guide is the people factor. So there should be a lot of training awareness to actually elevate the expertise or the knowledge of practices, VBI practices within the staff itself and also within the customers. And this can be done via trainings, workshops, also maybe engaging with NGOs to provide support when needed.
All right. Last one for Puan Juliana before I move on to Dato. So the exclusion list proposed in the guide is quite strict. So will it tie the hands of FIs?
Yeah, like we mentioned, the exclusion list is very much dependent on the maturity and the risk appetite of the financial institution. When you start off implementing VBI at the early stage, the exclusion list could be very generic and very wide because you have not developed into a stage where you can identify the metrics or areas of stance or risk appetite that you would not want to. But as the financial institution mature along the VBI spectrum, I would expect the exclusion list to actually reflect or tie back to their risk appetite in terms of their VBI strategies and business model.
All right. Thank you so much, Puan Juliana. I'd like to move on to Dato. Dato, so how can local SME manufacturers start embarking on their sustainability journey?
Okay, my advice is that let's start with if we have not started at all, let's start with a policy. Let's start from the top and relating to your business. What do you want to do in terms of climate change? Are you going to reduce your energy consumption? Are you going to do something about your water consumption in the manufacturing, right? On top of that, I think I would say even as any SME today, they have done bits and pieces of sustainability. Put all those together. Let's say, for example, in terms of CSR, in terms of community work, community program. Pull those programs together and start small. I mean, don't be too ambitious. But whatever you do must relate to your business and must give value to your business, because I think for a longer run of the business, you need to present that your product, what you're doing a business today, is giving more value than just a product or it's just a hardware, So that's my advice on how to start it. And if you still does not have proper knowledge, reach out to the closest FMM, for example, for manufacturing members. So we do have our expert here who can share their experience and reach out to who can point them to the right party who can help them in terms of how to start the sustainability. But I think it's very important. It must come from the top, from the owner. Then it will work, because if it's start from the manager in the middle, it will not be sustainable. So that's my advice.
So how do you see the sectoral guide would assist the manufacturing companies in their ESG considerations?
Treat this ESG sectoral guide as a tool to facilitate, as a tool to improve your knowledge in terms of improving what you are doing currently. Probably some areas were not even thought about during even in your current discussion or your current meeting. And this sectoral guide assists not only implementing the right projects, but also giving another perspective in terms of how to get an assistant in terms of finance, in terms of governance, in terms of incentive schemes. Because our government, Malaysian government, they really put a lot of resources, a lot of effort in terms of this sustainability. Because we are also part of the sustainability driver under the economic planning unit by the Prime Minister's department. So from there, I myself have seen the scope of the government who really providing all these facilities, all these services, all these tools for us to use it, to take advantage of it. So yeah, that's part of what I want to share today. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dato' Ashadi Alias, member of the Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers, or FMM Sustainable Development Committee, and Puan Juliana Tan Abdullah, Senior Vice President, Head of Group Operational and Islamic Banking Risk, Group Risk Management Alliance, Bank Berhad. And to all of you, thank you so much. If we didn't get the time to post your questions, kindly go to the IBEAM website, ibeam.com. Also, you can direct your questions. You can email to vbi@ibeam.com. We will compile all your questions later on that website, on IBEAM's website. And in the meantime, keep on the questions coming, because we have one more sector after this. We will read the comments and we'll post the suitable and relevant questions, time permitting, that you have for all our presenters. We'll take a short break and we'll return with our last sector, the construction and infrastructure sector. It's going to be a good one. Stick around. I'll see you in 5 minutes. additional delay. We just had to sort out some technical issues to ensure that you have the best viewing experience possible. Just a quick reminder before we move on to the final sector, do drop in your questions in the YouTube comment section. We will look at each question and we'll ask each relevant and suitable question depending on the time that we have available. You can also email your question to vbi@ibeam.com, and you can check out iBeam's website later, where we'll compile all the questions, including the ones that we do not get the time to actually address. So without further ado, we would like to move on to the third and final sector, which is the construction and infrastructure sector. Now, as per the 12th Malaysia Plan, construction and urbanization is key to this nation becoming a high-income developed nation. Even in developed nations such as the United States, maybe some of you have seen the recent debacle of passing a 2 trillion infrastructure bill, and that is for a developed nation. So what more for a developing nation like Malaysia? Construction and infrastructure is key. But as we chase rapid urbanization, how do we do it with balance? How do we do it taking into consideration the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, and also environmental and social priorities will not be put aside while we chase rapid urbanization for our developing country. So to provide the briefing on the guidance document for this sector, the construction and infrastructure sector, I would now like to invite Mr. Henko Donamadon. Henko is the head of property services for Bank Rakyat.
Right. Okay. Now, there are 6 topics which I'll be discussing in this presentation, 3 of which will be the description of the sectoral guide for CNI, and then the remaining 3 will be the action part by the FIs. So the 6 topics are the life cycle of construction and infrastructure. The second part will be dual or double materiality. Number 3, example of activities. Number 4, risk identification. Number 5, risk assessment. And number 6, risk mitigation. Next slide, please. Okay, basically the life cycle of construction and infrastructure is divided into 4 stages. The first stage is the design stage, where the concept and formation of policy is being formed. And then where the planning is, the feasibility studies, the design by architects and consultants, and then the cost estimation and budgeting takes place. The second part is where the interesting part is, where the actual project construction is being carried out, where mobilization, excavation, earthworks, piling, the structural works, architectural works, demolition occurs. And after construction is complete, then there will be the operation site, where the user of the premise or the building will be using the premise. And after the premise or the building has served its service life, then the last stage will be the decommissioning stage, where the premise or structure will be abandoned or demolished to allow for future development. Next. So the second topic is basically the dual or double materiality that is discussed inside this VBIAF. It is basically the ESG impact on the customer business, and also that the customer business will have an impact on the environment and the society as well. So basically, another way of looking at it, the materiality is the effect of climate change. And if we talk about climate change, it's the effect of climate change on finance and corporate activities. And at the same time, double materiality includes the effect of finance and corporate activities on the climate change itself. So basically, it's a two-way traffic. It's not one way. And this sectoral guide basically is formed on the basis that what gets measured will get managed. So disclosure of requirements will affect corporate behaviors. Next. These are examples of construction and infrastructure activities which has been included inside the sectoral guide. The examples include property development, dams and reservoir, pipeline, seaports, harbors and marinas, roads and railways, and airports. Of course, these examples are not conclusive. There are other examples of construction and infrastructure activities which occurs. Like we have reclamation works, we have cable laying works, and there are other types of construction and infrastructure activities which can be included in the in the risk assessment and mitigation. So what is given here are just examples and not the final list. Next. All right. So now is the action part by the FIs. The first part is risk identification. Risk identification rests on 3 pillars. Number 1 is the environmental risk. Number 2 is the social risk. And number 3 is the governance risk. So for the purpose of presentation, I will take only one example and I will follow through with that example all the way from risk identification to risk assessment and lastly to risk mitigation. So the example that I will be using is the biodiversity loss and deforestation. So this is a huge impact on the environment basically because of the significant habitat loss especially for endangered species, animals, or impacts on the mitigation routes of birds, nesting habits. Okay, next. Okay, so once risk has been identified, FIs are expected to form up their risk metrics. Okay, we go back to the same example. Biodiversity loss and deforestation. So the recommended metrics could be changes in forest cover or percentage of green spaces for urban areas or percentage of losses in greeneries. We can check on funding for biodiversity conservation or percentage of natural habitat increase or loss. Can go for numbers actually, like numbers of critically endangered or vulnerable species. So basically what is given here, the risk categories, the impact and the recommended metrics are just examples. FIs may expand it or may start with lesser or smaller type of risk metrics. Still depends on the risk appetite of each FIs and the customer base of each FIs. Next. Next. Okay. This is the social and governance risk, impact, and recommended metrics for social and governance. Social could include labor rights and working condition, human rights and community relation, and also the most important part is the occupational safety and health, where sometimes fatalities is a very important aspect to look at, and the previous experience of the potential customer should be taken into consideration. Next. So when we talk about risk assessment, FIs are expected to develop different sets of metrics or indicators for different categories of the ESG pillars, the 3 ESG pillars which I mentioned earlier on, where metrics or indicators can be based on likelihood and also the second part is the assignment of appropriate risk score for the impact of metrics indicator. So the risk scoring can be divided into 2 levels. The first level is the widely accepted metrics using polar question, yes or no. And the second level will be more complicated, more detailed risk assessment, where FIs are supposed to set their own threshold or parameters that by assigning weightages and different scores based on the quality, can be in terms of percentages, can be in terms of numbers, points, can be in terms of high, medium, or low. Next. Okay, these are examples of risk assessment given inside this presentation. Number 1 is the environmental. So I will continue with the biodiversity loss and deforestation risk, impact, and categories. Right. For level 1, basically we can look at whether the customer have provided sufficient reports, whether they provide report for EIA or ESIA, HCVACS, and the scoring will be yes or no. That one is for level 1. Whereas if the FI choose to expand to level 2, the scoring before that, the scoring would be can be in terms of low, medium, or high. Where low risk would be satisfactory report. Medium risk would be sufficient evidence that effective mitigations have been provided, and there are some issues to be addressed. Whereas high risk could be the unsatisfactory report provided by the potential customers. So basically, these are just examples. These are not final. Next will be the social and governance risk. So still we have the level 1, level 2. FIs might opt for just level 1, or can go all the way to level 2, or can use level 1 as an entry level and level 2 for assessment level. Next. Okay, once risk has been assessed, then we go to risk mitigation. So there are two categories which we have, which the Sectoral Guide has addressed. One is the steps in managing risk, where loss has been identified related to CNI. We can look at the commitment of the customer, benchmarking by local or international framework. And the second part could be the additional steps to improve positive impact and mitigate negative impacts. For example, FI may impose adequate penalties for non-compliance, could offer some protection in terms of takaful or something like that, and even may request the customer to adopt recognized management system like ISO 18000 or ISO 14000. So these are just the samples of risk mitigations. But anyway, this risk mitigation should be read together with BNM, climate change and principle-based taxonomy, guiding principle 4 on remedial measures to transition for better alignment. Next. Okay, these are also example of risk impact and mitigation for different categories. So we go back to biodiversity loss and deforestation. On the impact base, when we talk about impact, we talk about, for example, we talk about loss or degradation of habitat of endangered species. And then the mitigation measures could be to ensure that the development are not in breach of national policy or the EQA or Environmental Protection Enactment 1974 and Natural Resources and Environment Ordinance 1993. When we talk about land clearance, which lead to deforestation and increased landslide, the mitigation could be, this is just an example, could be to conduct appropriate site alternative, proper protection to the slope to avoid erosion or landslide or mudslides. All right. So the next slide will talk, still discuss on the examples. This one is on water, pollution and waste, resources. And the next slide will talk about the examples of social impact. Social impacts, especially the area, I think we believe that FI should look into would be the labor rights and working condition, occupational safety and health, and human rights and community relation. So, and then the last part is the governance. This is just an example given in the sectoral guide. FIs may develop further, may not stick to these examples. It depends on the appetite and the customer base of each FIs. Next. All right, inside risk mitigation, we also have the sectoral guide also have negative lists, which should be avoided by FIs. This is being given inside the BNM climate change and principle-based taxonomy. Guiding Principle 5 on prohibited activities. Number 1 is the project that can or will significantly damage non-replicable cultural property. Number 2, activities that could impinge on the land owned or claim under adjudication by indigenous people. Number 3 are projects that impacts World Heritage Sites, list of Ramsar wetlands, Alliance for Reserve Extinction Sites, Category 1 to 4 of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. Number 4 is the project clearing of high conservation value, HCV, high carbon forests and environmentally sensitive areas. Number 5 is the production or activities involving harmful or exploitation of labor or even child labor. And number 6 is the energy sector projects that flare significant amount of harmful gases, basically. Okay, next slide. So under risk mitigation as well, FI should focus on the performance monitoring and management, which is being mentioned in the Guiding Principle 4 of the Climate Change and Principle-Based Taxonomy by BNM. So these steps being shown here are just examples. Starts with establishing performance tracking and reporting mechanism, establish ESG metrics, impose specific condition on ESG, and all the way to extend support to customer to help them manage the ESG risk. Even lastly, to provide training program, skills and knowledge transfers to customers. Right, next slide. So this is the last mitigation which I will talk about today. On the remedial measures. Remedial measures, there are two parts. One is the rectification plan. Rectification plan means the immediate corrective measures. For example, we have condition precedents to the financing that must be imposed to minimize negative ESG impact. And part of the remedial measures as well would be the performance plan, which is the long-term measures to help to improve positive impact of businesses. So these remedial measures, we give examples down there. There are 5 down there. One is the steps taken by the customer to rectify negative impacts. Advisory or support by FIs to their customers, facilitate appropriate nurturing programs or to establish clear escalation procedures, and to establish exceptions to the remedies and exit procedures. So basically, the sectoral guide give guides and examples to FIs to start off their journey into sustainability. This VBI is just an intermediary that functions to deliver the intended outcome of Maqasid Syariah, of which the application of Syariah principle of attainment and benefit and prevention of harms and integration of Syariah are keys to this sectoral guide, whereby FI should define their respective approaches to integrate Syariah into their business strategy. And this sectoral guide as well is not an ultimatum to the development of risk metrics of our FIs. It just provide guidance and examples for the implementation of impact-based assessment related to ESG for construction and infrastructure sector. The actual risk metrics to be developed by FIs will depend largely on the risk appetite and customer base of FIs. And FIs may adopt the examples given inside the sector guide, or they can even develop their own metrics. And FI may also appoint professional or consultant to assist them to evaluate the ESG risk metrics, or may employ their own subject matter experts to develop their own metrics to assess the compliance with regards to ESG for sustainability initiative. And before I end, I would like to thank also Bank Islam, Bank Muamalat, AM Islamic for their efforts in making this sector guide a success. And thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam, Mr. Henkel. Thank you so much for your comprehensive presentation. Now, key to the construction and infrastructure industry is, of course, CIDB. Now, established in 1994, CIDB is responsible for monitoring, developing, and also easing the construction industry's development towards global resilience. Now, to talk about the strategic role that CIDB plays in managing the construction industry, especially in this new norm in the wake of a pandemic that we just gone through, I'd like to invite Surveyor Ahmad Farin Mukhtar. Farin is the Senior General Manager of CIDB Malaysia. Farin, take it away. The voice is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. MC. Thank you for the brief introduction of myself. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting CIDB to be part of this initiative, VBIAF, and we are indeed deeply honored. And hopefully the initiative today will help to spur more implementation of sustainable and green practices in the industry. So we'll start with my presentation now. A bit about the scope of my presentation. We'll start by briefly introducing what is CIDB all about. What are the rules and regulation related, specifically related to sustainability and green initiative, and what are the government policy related to this initiative. So to start with, a bit about CIDB. We are established in 1995 under the Act 520 atau Lembaga Pembangunan Industri Pembinaan. And we are an agency or statutory body under the Ministry of Works Malaysia. And we are self-financing agency, meaning that we don't receive any grant or financial assistance from the government. We survive solely on the levy that is imposed on project. Under the Act, every project value 500,000 and above are required to pay a levy of 0.25% to CIDB. But in 2003, under the stimulus package at that time, the government decided that the levy imposed to be reduced by 50%. So currently we are imposing 0.125% for project of 500,000 and above. And we consider ourselves to be private sector driven, meaning that we have 11 board members in CIDB, and 6 of the board members are from the private sector. And basically under this Act 520, we have 14 functions under this Act. It can be categorized into 3 categories: the advisory, regulatory, and development role. Under the advisory, we take, under the regulatory, we are required to register and accredit contractors. So under the Act of 520, the contractor or any company that undertake construction job are required to, it is mandatory for them to be registered with CIDB. So any company that fail to do so and found to undertake construction work are liable to be fined up to 100,000. So that is what been stipulated under the Act of 520. We also register and accredit construction personnel, and we regulate the implementation of IBS in the construction industry. In 2023, the implementation of IBS is been made mandatory for building value 50 million and above. And also we regulate the conformance of standard for construction workmanship and materials. So any materials that is produced here and also imported from other countries need to comply to the standard that we listed under the Schedule 4 of Act 520. And we also regulate the implementation for safety and quality of construction work. And under the advisory role, we provide consultancy and advisory services with respect to the construction industry. We manage any complaint or reports made in respect of any failure of construction work. We received a few complaints about where site are not operating not according to procedure and all that. So we will take immediate action to ensure that all sites meet the current regulation being posed. And we also advise and make recommendation to the federal and state government on matter related to construction industry, as well as promote, stimulate the development and expansion of the construction industry. That is on the advisory role. While on the development role, one of it is to obtain, publish, and initiate and maintain information relating to construction industry. The second part is to promote, review, and coordinate training in the construction industry. Just a few info for the participant in this forum today. That the certificate, we have one certificate for the construction worker called SKK, CJ Kecakapan Kemahiran, whereby this certificate is actually been recognized in other countries, especially in Singapore and also Middle East. So what happened that those people that we train, once they obtain their certificate, they will work in Malaysia for about 3 to 5 years. Then after that, they will move to more lucrative market. And these people are highly sought after in those countries that I mentioned earlier. So just to inform the participant today that that is the value of the certificate issued by SIDB to recognize the construction workers in the industry. And another role on this development is to promote, stimulate, and undertake research. We have one research arm under SIDB called CRIM, the Construction Research Institute of Malaysia. So they undertake research related to construction, and also to promote and encourage quality assurance. We have one assessment system for quality called QLASIC. This has been around since for the past 10 years. And most developers are using QLASIC as their marketing tool to show that the houses that they are selling meet the quality requirement. And last but not least, on the development role is to promote, stimulate, and assist in the export of services relating to construction industry. So we also promote companies going abroad, not only contractors, but those companies involved in the supply chain, such as the consultant, the supplier, manufacturer. As long as they are related to construction industry, they come under the umbrella of CIDB to be promoted for overseas market. Okay, under the Act of 520, there are two definitions related to construction. One is on the industry in totality. What is the definition under the industry, the construction industry is all about. The other one is the construction works, which basically related to the project itself. So under the Act, the construction industry is defined as the industry related to construction works, including design, manufacturing, technology, material, and workmanship, and services for purposes of construction. While the construction works, as I mentioned earlier, refer to project, which is the construction, extension, installation, repair, maintenance, renewal, removal, renovation, alteration, dismantling or demolition of any building, any road, harbour works, railway, cableway, canal, and aerodrome, any drainage, irrigation, or river control works, any electrical, mechanical, water, gas, petrochemical, or telecommunication works, any bridge, viaduct, dam, reservoir, earthworks, pipeline, sewer, aqueduct, culvert, drive, shaft, tunnel, or reclamation work. So it meant to say that any works under the sky is actually covered under this definition of construction work. And this also include any preparation work, which it could be start from the planning, design, any site preparation work. It's also part of the construction work definition under the construction work, and also the procurement of that construction work. So that the value chain of the starting from the planning up until execution and up until you demolish that building is covered under this definition of construction work under this Act 520. So the next is specifically on this sustainable construction ecosystem. What are the things that we need to have to ensure that the program that we implement with regards to sustainability and green is effective for the industry. So we need to identify what are the things that we needed, the ecosystem basically. So first thing is on the capacity building development. So we have to develop the people to ensure that there will be enough people with knowledge when come to implement on the sustainability and also green practices. So we have a program for MyCREST facilitator. We have a program for sustainable infrastructure facilitator. Also, we cooperate with other bodies like GBI and also Green RE under radar to coordinate to implement training for facilitator as well as Green RE manager. And also we develop standard and guidelines in relation to sustainable and green practices. So among the guideline that we have developed together with the industry is MS 1525, energy efficiency for non-residential, MS 2680, guideline of erosion and sedimentation control, safety and health guideline for construction workers, low carbon city framework, and green government procurement. So those are among the guidelines that we are involved, where we are part of the working group. And also we look into the legal requirement to ensure that these green and sustainable practices can be implemented seamlessly in Malaysia. And we also have to look the incentive, because currently we are looking at the carrot part, not the cane part, but the carrot part, whereby we have to provide incentive to get more company to be on board with these sustainable and green practices. No doubt that when you are practicing sustainable and green, the cost of operating will increase between 15 to 20% compared to the normal practices. So we do submit proposal to the government in terms of incentive. We also working with MIDA in recommending company for the government investment tax allowance and also government's incentive tax exemption. And we're also working with several agencies on this green technology financial scheme. And we also conduct seminar to create more awareness for the industry on the need to have more these sustainable and green practices. And we also provide the tools to assess the green requirement for building. So this could be under MyCREST, which has been developed by CIDB, or for infrastructure projects through sustainable infrastructure. These are two assessment tools that are specifically being developed by CIDB for the industry through the input by the industry itself. So specifically on green initiative, these are among the initiatives that has been undertaken by CIDB for the past 3 years with regards to this green initiative. One is the development of this greenhouse gas baseline for construction industry. We have come up with the report and we have presented this report out to our minister level. And we found out that in terms of construction, the majority of the greenhouse gas GHG emission come from the factory, not from the site. So we found out 80% of the greenhouse gas emission is actually from the manufacturing site. From the construction site, it's only about 20% GHG emission. And also we have developed some of the guideline and standard for the reference for the industry. The guideline on flood risk assessment and flood vulnerability index for critical infrastructure in Malaysia. This is basically a preventive measure that you can undertake, meaning by using this guideline, you can identify whether that project is in the high risk or low risk area. So this guideline has been approved at the ministry level, and currently will be published published soon for the public consumption. And also we have also developed guideline on landslide vulnerability assessment and development of risk index for critical infrastructure. The construction on pit and organic soil in Malaysia, whereby the construction on pit is very critical to ensure that there won't be any settlement after the building has completed, and the inventory of embedded construction material, as well as the establishment of greenhouse gas calculator for IBS projects. So we have developed those for the reference for the industry. And we have also provide incentive, not directly in terms of money, but what we did is that we subsidized the training for the industry. So training for MICRES and sustainable infrastructure under CIDB is currently being heavily subsidized by CIDB, meaning the participant need only to pay, if I'm not mistaken, is about 100 ringgit per day of training. And the majority of the cost, almost 80% of the cost, is actually being subsidized by CIDB itself. And the assessment for MICRES and sustainable infrastructure under CIDB is also been heavily subsidized. If I'm not mistaken, the fee to conduct or to undertake this MICRES and sustainable infrastructure is already around 500 ringgit. Actually, the cost is more than that. And as I mentioned earlier, it has been heavily subsidized by CIDB. And also, MICRES is also recognized under my Hijau scheme. And we have also developed, as I mentioned earlier in my previous slide, we also developed 2 rating tools specifically for the Sustainable Agreement Initiative, which is MICRES, which is for building, and sustainable infrastructure, which is basically for infrastructure project. So that among the green initiative undertaken by CIDB for the industry for the past 3 years. For the past 3 years under this, I forgot to mention earlier, this is part of the initiative under this construction industry transformation program, whereby we have this one strategic plan that we have developed, and that program has ended by 2020, but some of the initiatives still continue until today. So those, the one that I mentioned earlier is part of the initiative under this CITP, or Construction Industry Transformation Program. So a little bit about MICRES, which I mentioned earlier, is an assessment tool to measure the carbon release by building. So MICRES is specifically been developed for that, whereby you can calculate the amount of carbon that will be released based on the design of that building. So MICRES is actually being developed together with the industry. We have input from contractors, from developers, from consultants. They are part of the working group during the development of this MICRES. So MICRES stands for Malaysian Carbon Reduction Environmental Sustainability Tool, and as I mentioned earlier, it is to measure the carbon release. You can measure the carbon release during the design stage, not after you have start to construct the building, but you can identify the amount of carbon at the very early stage, so that you will take the necessary step to reduce the carbon release for that specific project. And the aim is to quantify and reduce big environment impact in terms of carbon emission and environmental implications. So MICRES is a tool developed by CIDB and currently being used mostly for project under the Ministry of Works. Those projects that are undertaken by Public Works Department. There are also a few projects, the private projects that have also undertaken to use MICRES for their green assessment tool. And the aim and objective of the MICRES is, number one, is to integrate the carbon assessment criteria and reduction strategy into the matrix of sustainability, resulting in a combined sustainable assessment rating system for the built environment. The second is to provide a quantifiable carbon assessment. As I mentioned earlier, MyCRES is the only tool that can, they are equipped with carbon calculator, where you can calculate the carbon release starting from the design stage already. And number three is to extend the present green building assessment into life cycle impact and its quantification. And number four is to combine both carbon emission and sustainable performance factors into a combined criterion linked to design, construction, commissioning, and operation of the building, and also to meet the requirement under this low carbon city framework. So those are the aims and objective of MyCRES. Next is the Sustainable Infrastar. This is also another green assessment tool that was developed by CIDB, also with the input from industry. And this is actually a combination of what we have before under this CIDB, and also penarafan hijau under JKR. So what we have under Infrastar is actually a combination of both. And we make reference to other infra assessment tool in other parts of the world, such as LEEDs, such as well, I can't recall the other two assessment tool where we made reference to, but what we did is actually a combination of all. It is actually a hybrid of all the major assessment tools that have been used worldwide. So as a result, we have come up with this Sustainable Infrastar. This is specifically for infrastructure projects such as highway, bridge, railway, things like that. So all the infrastructure project will be using this Sustainable Infrastar as the rating tool for green assessment. And this rating tool has been launched by our Minister of Works in 19 March 2019. And the aims is to assess the extent of sustainability measure adopted by infrastructure projects in design and construction. And also, the next is, among the policy that has been imposed by the government in order to encourage more projects to have these sustainability practices and also green practices. Basically, the idea is for the government to take a lead in this sustainable practices. So the government become the shining example to the others. I give you an example on IBS project. In 2008, when IBS was implemented, the policy of IBS, the Industrialized Building System, was introduced in 2008. And the level of IBS usage at that time for government projects is only about 20%. But the policy required any government project valued 10 million and above, it is mandatory to be using IBS. So along the way, until now, in 2021, the usage have increased up to 98, if I'm not mistaken, about 90%. So meaning to say there are 90% of government projects are using IBS. So the same thing, we are using the same principle now to ensure that most government projects will start to practice this sustainability initiative. So under JKR, because they are implementing the project. So they have come up with this policy whereby for project value 50 million and above, it is mandatory for them to use MyCRES as an assessment tool. So this is part of the requirement for government project. And hopefully from here, it will start to spur more projects to be implemented using MyCRES.
All right. So Farin, thank you so much. I do apologize. I know you're coming to the end of your presentation, but we are a bit over time. But I do thank you so much It was a very comprehensive and complete presentation. Thank you so much again to Surveyor Ahmad Farid Mukhtar of CIDB Malaysia, and I would like to ask for Surveyor Farid, maybe some of those things that you didn't have time to address, you can address in the question and answer session, which we are starting right now. And I also like to invite again Henko Dona Amadon from Bank Rakyat for us to start the Q&A session for about 15 minutes before we move on to the wrapping. All right, guys, many things were shared just now. I'd like to start with Henko. Henko, first of all, are all provisions in the respective sectoral guide to be mandatorily complied by all FIs?
Okay, thank you, MC. Basically, these guidelines are just for voluntary adoption and implementation. It is just a prescribed best practices, framework and solution may not be applicable universally, but the applicability should be determined based on FI's appetite. It also has to be based on the maturity of and preparedness of the FIs to integrate sustainability principles into their business model. And it also depends very much on the ability to build their own capacity or to nurture value chain partners with appropriate skills and knowledge, and as well as the long-term aspiration to align and support organizational, national, and international agenda of sustainable development. So basically, these guidelines, just guidelines and examples for FIs to refer to, and not mandatory for the time being. It's a voluntary adoption. It is a journey. When we talk about journey, we have to start somewhere. We can start small, and the FIs can grow into sustainability adoption along the way. Yeah, thank you.
Right, so the current construction and infrastructure industry is still recovering, of course, from the negative impacts of COVID-19, especially SMEs, small and medium enterprises, and also small and medium entrepreneurs. Low capital to start up construction and labor shortage, especially skilled foreign workers, added to the difficulties of SMEs. So how is the VBIAF and VBIAF CNI construction and infrastructure sectoral guide going to be implemented by SMEs and to SMEs? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We do acknowledge that this is the main concern to small and medium entrepreneurs, because right now with the effect of COVID-19, the capital is very low, and they have labor shortages. So basically, this VBIAF is just an initiative. This VBIAF initiative is just a journey. The SMEs can make changes by taking the first steps, as well as FIs, because most FIs, this is also the first step into promoting and adopting sustainability into their business practices. Basically, the sectoral guide is to promote industry-wide knowledge exchange, to establish reference point for deliberation and implementation of ESG assessment. So this is a journey, and like I mentioned earlier on, a journey. When we prepare for a journey, we have to start somewhere. Doesn't have to start very big. It can start small, but we have to start somewhere. And I think awareness and education is very important, and FIs can together assist small and medium entrepreneurs to start embarking into sustainability. And because the requirement might not be very rigid for timing, it start small. It's not something that might not cost that much for the timing, but it has to start somewhere. This is just a journey. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to move on to Surveyor Farid. Maybe you can chip in, and I also squeeze in my question so you can answer both at one go. So my question to you is it compulsory for all buildings to be MyCrest certified?
Okay. Well, let me answer your question first. No, it's not compulsory. It's a voluntary basis, except for government project, where I mentioned earlier under government, meaning I refer to project under JKR. So those projects under JKR for 50 million and above, they are required to pay. They are required to undertake this green MyCREST assessment. But for other projects, it's on voluntary basis. It's not mandatory. So just to add into Mr. Henko just now, basically the pandemic situation is actually a reset button for us. We have to realize that we cannot continue to do things like the way we do before. I mentioned earlier the only way forward for us, I mean, it's not only for construction industry, but also for other industry, is through digitalization and also sustainability. So that's the way forward. Now, I agree, it's the recovery period for all industry. The cost of raw material is high, shortage of labor and all that. So now it's recovery period. So it may take some time for us to actually implement these sustainable practices. But like Mr. Henko say, we have to start somewhere. So I agree with what Mr. Henko said just now.
All right, thank you so much, Farin. Well said. A follow-up question on that, and I'm sure a lot of developers would want to know this. Can a building still be MyCREST certified if it is already GBI, LEED, or Green Star certified? Is it possible to apply for more than one certification?
Yep, there's no stopping for them to apply for more certification. The only issue is the cost of doing that. They have to pay fees for all these certifications, but there's no stopping for them to have more than one certification. I have looked into a few companies that they have done 2 or 3 assessments basically for their marketing tool. So there's no stopping for companies to undertake more than one certification.
All right, thank you. I would like to go back to Henko with what Farin said earlier in terms of the risk and the new way of doing things. So is this impact or risk assessment to be conducted at customers level only or otherwise?
Well, this sectoral guide describes describe this it's not to be implemented only at a customer end. It will be implemented on both a customer and the FI's end. Basically, if you look at the sectoral guide, you look at paragraph 52 of the VBIAF. Basically, the sectoral guide insisted that the impact assessment should be conducted on both customer and at transaction levels. The guidance provided in this document focuses on transaction level risk, but may also be used to assess customer level risk. Customer level onboarding process is stated in paragraph 4. If you look at the VBIAF, basically it is level 1 of the assessment. And you can also look at the footnote 8 of this measurement at page 48 inside the sectoral guide. Thank you.
Right, we have just little time left, so I'd like to do this. I'd like to give one question to Henko and one to Farin. It's the same question. So just to wrap it all up, I'll start with Henko first. So just to wrap it all up, what are your final words, your closing words, and what do you hope to be the main takeaways from today's session, your sector session, for the audience and for everyone's watching today?
Okay, thank you, Mr. MC. Basically, sustainability is something that we should embark on. It is a way to sustain our future generation. Of course, people can say that we are late in implementing sustainability, but for us, it is never too late to embark on anything which is good for the future generation. We never know what the ESG impact will be on the industry much later on, but this would serve as a stepping stone for us to survive and to sustain in the future, which you cannot really tell now with the COVID-19, we also believe that the industry will change a lot. Even financing industry will also change a lot. So this is a very good start to start on, and it is a journey. It is a journey. We have to start somewhere, and hopefully our future generation will appreciate what we are doing today.
Indeed, hopefully. All right, Farin, 1 minute, your parting words and what do you hope would be the main points and the main takeaways?
Yeah, well, I've said it this many times, not only in this forum, but other forum before this, that the only way forward for the construction industry is through digitalization and sustainability. That is the only way forward. If you don't do that, then we're going to be left behind. We are now being left behind by other countries that is way down before us, like Vietnam and Thailand. Now they are ahead of us. In terms of sustainability, Thailand is far more ahead of us. So for me, is the only way forward. The only thing is in Malaysia is we keep on talking about the cost, because in Malaysia we tends to look at I'm talking about the construction, especially those developers. We tend to look at the current costs. We never look at the future costs. So when we do sustainability, what are the future costs that we save? So we have to look into that. We have to look in totality, not only at the current cost only. So in order to practice that, we have to change the mindset from now. So like Mr. Henko said, we have to start slowly. I agree with that. We have to start slowly, but at the same time, we also have to run fast. If not, we're going to be left behind again for another maybe 10 or 20 years after this.
Starting and hit the ground running. Thank you so much, Surveyor Ahmad Farin Mukhtar, Senior General Manager of CIDB Malaysia, and also Henko Donamadon, Head of Property Services for Bank Rakyat. And I'd like to remind you guys again, please feel free to actually post your questions. If we don't have time to actually address all your questions, we do apologize. But you can email your questions to vbi@ibim.com. We will compile them all, and you will be able to see it on the IBIM's website, which is ibim.com. Now we have come to the end of our event today, but just before that, we saved the best for last. For the closing remarks, it is my pleasure now to actually invite Puan Madalina Muhammad, Pengarah Jabatan Perbankan Islam and Takaful for Bank Negara Malaysia, for the closing remarks. Puan Madalina, take it away.
Thank you, Luqman. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon. Climate change, once a far-off threat, is now upon us. It brings alarming changes to our planet at a pace more quickly than we feared. But we are far from powerless in the face of this crisis of global scale. We have been warned that the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. These are the words of Robert Swan, an explorer best known as the first person to walk to both North and South Poles. Having personally seen the damage of climate change on the polar ice caps, Swan dedicated his entire life towards environmental protection. While we may not be explorers like Swan, his story is relatable to us. The financial sector, being the heart of the economy, is well positioned to drive changes for a sustainable future. Domestically, we are seeing the financial industry rising up to the occasion, albeit at uneven pace. From greater integration of sustainability and climate-related considerations in business strategies and decisions and in risk management practices, to longer-term commitments and aspirations towards net zero carbon emissions, financial institutions are making headways in responding within their individual capacities. The financial ecosystem is now pivoting to not only greening finance, but to financing green. This entails providing financial means to green-inspired corporates and entrepreneurs to start and scale up. We are encouraged that assistance is offered to customers to adopt sustainable practices and to transition to greener practices through financing, underwriting, advisory, and investment activities. The evolving risks and opportunities of climate and sustainability issues, however, require the financial sector to constantly adapt and innovate beyond its traditional business models and strategies. So this includes venturing into alternative modes of finance that can support impact-driven individual and businesses with scalable solutions. An example is blended finance solutions, which offer entrepreneurship programs to help customers transition to more sustainable practices over and above the infusion of risk-absorbent component. I would like to emphasize that climate transition is not only a global climate imperative, but also an economic imperative. Globally, over 3,000 corporations have committed to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Locally, corporates such as Petronas have also joined the race to zero, and we anticipate more to follow suit. While this is taking place, it is imperative that as a nation, we ensure that the transition pathways and responses create an orderly and just transition, that no specific economic sector or vulnerable segment of the business community and households being prematurely dislocated. Financial institutions, through their actions, therefore, have to do more to support such transition and to advocate sustainable practices. We expect this to gain momentum with the implementation of the Climate Change and Principle-Based Taxonomy, or CCPT, in providing greater emphasis on climate risk mitigation and adaptation activities. The taxonomy will strengthen incentives for both financial institutions and businesses to adopt practices that are aligned to climate goals. It will also pave the way for plans that will be announced soon to mandate the adoption of climate-related financial disclosures by financial institutions. The VBIAF Sectoral Guide is a key component to this initiative. It serves as an important toolkit for financial institutions to transform your existing portfolios and to nurture your customers to adopting more sustainable business practices. For this, let me congratulate Encik Azwan and the working group members on the release of the second cohort of the VBI Sectoral Guides. I would also like to commend Encik Azwan and the team for stepping forward to take up the responsibility, just like Robert Swan did. Well done and thank you. And I look forward to more from the industry to come forward to carry on the torch for the subsequent cohorts. As the next step in our climate frontier, the bank through the JC3 will soon release an exposure draft on climate risk management and scenario analysis to assist financial institutions in ensuring that their governance practices are in check and that their risk management practices are well planned. We are also working very closely with members of the CCPT implementation group in addressing implementation issues towards a credible and effective adoption of the taxonomy. This includes development of more use cases as guidance for the industry, particularly relating to risk underwriting for the insurance and takaful sector. Access to affordable funding for the transition is critical, especially for micro entrepreneurs and SMEs. On this, as announced recently, the bank will be setting up a 1 billion ringgit low carbon transition facility that will be equally matched by the financial industry. The facility, which will be launched early next year, signifies our continuous commitment to help small businesses and SMEs embrace sustainable and low carbon practices in their business operations. The bank also remains committed to explore the use of regulatory tools such as Pillar 2 capital requirements, executive remuneration, single and large exposure limits to encourage and accelerate climate risk management readiness, as well as the channeling of financial flows to support transition. Regionally, the bank is working closely with our peers and counterparts through the ASEAN Taxonomy Board in the development of a regional taxonomy. Just last week, the conceptual framework of the ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance was released. This marks a major milestone in promoting harmonious standards for classifying sustainable economic activities within the region. The ASEAN Taxonomy is a multi-tiered framework comprising a foundation framework that serves all economies in ASEAN and a plus standard, which is an advanced framework that is based on specific criteria and science-based thresholds. The tiered approach is intended to cater to the uniqueness of each member state's financial systems and transition path. As the infinite cost of climate change reaches irreversible highs, now it's time for us to take bold actions collectively. For the financial sector, it is clear that business as usual is not good enough, and the industry has to step up to catalyze change. By doing so, the industry stands to gain as the green economy is set to grow in size and momentum with increasing environmental, social, and governance considerations among investors, corporations, and consumers. The journey ahead, however, necessitates the financial sector to persevere and to gain greater resilience. We can learn from the courage and endurance exemplified by Robert Swan, who will himself on to complete his journey at the polls despite the excruciating pain of his spinal injury. The financial sector is not alone in this journey, and with greater public-private partnerships, we can co-create a conducive ecosystem for sustainable finance to thrive. And the VBIAF Sectoral Guide illustrates a milestone that we have achieved together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Puan Madalina Muhammad, Pengarah Jabatan Perbankan Islam dan Takaful for Bank Negara Malaysia. Very wise closing words. I think it's a very good way to wrap it all up. And I would just like to thank you all for joining us, and allow me 1 minute again to thank all of our speakers and presenters today for the wonderful presentations and papers that they have shared with us. Mr. Nazir Bek of CIMB Islamic, Puan Suhaila Othman of Petronas, Dr. Chen Waini of Hibiscus Petroleum Berhad for the oil and gas sector, Puan Juliana Tan Abdullah of Alliance Bank, and Datu Ashhadi Alias from FMM, Federation of Malaysian Manufacturers for the Construction and Infrastructure Industry. And as we've seen just now, Mr. Henko Dona Madon of Bank Rakyat, and also Surveyor Ahmad Farid Mukhtar, the Senior General Manager of CIDB Malaysia for the construction industry. And my apologies, Puan Juliana and Datu Ashhadi actually for the manufacturing industry, and Mr. Henko for Mr. Farid or Surveyor Farid for the construction and infrastructure industry. I'd just like to remind you guys again for the last time, do direct all your questions to vbi@ibeam.com. You will be able to check out all of your questions as well as the answers and all that we've seen today on the iBeam website very, very shortly. And a reminder, the public feedback for all these three sectors that we've shared today will end on the 7th of January 2022. 7th of January of next year. So we welcome feedback from all stakeholders, including people who have joined us, industry practitioners, experts, and academicians. You have until 7th of January 2022. Thank you so much all again for joining us. We hope to see you soon. Stay cool, stay safe, and stay green. Assalamualaikum, and we'll see you later. Have a nice day.